Good evening. Let me call to order the regular City Council meeting for the City of St. Helena for November 13th, 2018. Mr. Doring, would you lead us in the pledge?
Place your hand over your heart and join along with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Mayor Galbraith?
Here.
Vice Mayor White?
Here.
Councilmember Doring?
Here.
Ellsworth?
Here.
Coperstein?
Here.
I'd like to acknowledge the presence of Anna Chateau, elected to our City Council, who will be joining us in December. I'd also like to begin with a moment of silence, memory of Elena Housley, the other victims of the Thousand Oaks shooting, and the many victims north and south of the fires that we are experiencing here in California. Thank you very much. Next item on our agenda is public forum. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to us with respect to matters that are not on our agenda this evening, and public comment at public forum is limited to 4 minutes. Anybody wish to speak at public forum?
Hi, my name is Bobby Monette. I'm speaking as a citizen. I have laryngitis. Apologize for the rasp. A couple of months ago, I came up and spoke a little bit about e-cigarettes and the comparative studies that have been done in Napa County between cities in terms of proximity of vendors or dispensaries to schools and more. And a couple of people had wanted a packet of information, and the county public health department, Jennifer Henn and Jessica Chapin, worked very hard to get me enough of these to go for everyone. But what I thought I would do is, because I met with them, and what they would like to do is give a presentation to the City Council, maybe after the first of the year, 15 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever you would decide. And at that time, about a week before the presentation, I could deliver this information to you so it doesn't get lost in the holiday stuff, and you'd have a chance to look over. And then Jennifer Henn is a PhD in the epidemiology part of the health department, and Jessica Chapin is also a really skilled and interesting and knowledgeable representative. So I'm asking this council if you would consider putting this on an agenda in the near future, and with the opportunity for these two women and maybe others to do a presentation. I won't be part of it, so it would be two professional people who really know what they're talking about. So.
Yeah, excellent suggestion. And would you send the city clerk an email with the names you just mentioned?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other person wish to speak at public forum?
Okay. Good evening, members of the City Council. My name is Larkin Dwyer, and I'm here speaking on behalf of St. Helena High's youth. To begin, I would like to thank you for your time and allowing us to speak tonight. Simply put, St. Helena's Municipal Code 912.
All right, let me stop you there.
Is that on the agenda?
That's on the agenda, so we have a discussion coming up, and we'll hear you then. Anybody else at public comment? Public forum? All right. Let me close public forum. We met in closed session. I don't believe we had any reportable action. Is that correct?
That's correct. The City Council met this afternoon in closed session, discussed all 4 items designated on the agenda for that meeting, and no reportable actions were taken.
All right. Mr. Presswich?
Just want to put a continuing plug in for an event throughout the month of December that we're calling St. Helena Jingle All the Way. There's a website that we have up on the large screens tonight. The website is stjinglealltheway.com. Easy to remember. It does flow right off the tongue. This is an event that will take place on Thursdays and Fridays from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Beginning December 1st in Lyman Park, and also on Saturdays and Sundays from noon to 8 p.m. So think skating, think food trucks, think hot cocoa and hot toddy stands, and a lot of fun. And so there's a lot of work being put into the production of this. The tickets can be purchased in advance and reserved through this website down to the day and hour of your choosing. And there are also opportunities for sponsorship between $250 and $5,000.
Okay, Ms. Mitz. Mr. Thomas. Mr. Hausch.
Briefly, I just wanted to identify that the General Plan EIR was published on October 23rd for public review and comment period. Due to the holidays and the significant amount of information that's contained in the document, staff is published for a 72-day comment period, and so we are asking for all comments to be provided by January 2nd to the Planning Department. And we've scheduled a public hearing to receive spoken comments before the Planning Commission on December 4th, and that starts at 6 p.m. here at Vintage Hall. So just wanted to let the public and the council know that the EIR is available for review and comment, and we're hoping to hear directly from them should they want to provide comments verbally on the 4th.
Okay, very good. Ms. Smithies? Ms. Coberstein?
No, I just have a follow-up question. Will there be another opportunity for public comment since December 4th is people are still probably wading through the document?
So written comments can be provided anytime prior to January 2nd to fall within the legal public comment period. Those will be provided responses to in what's called the final draft, and that will be brought back before the Planning Commission at a public hearing for review and discussion of the entire document.
So people can make more oral comment at the. It's not just next.
That's correct. So comments that don't come in during the 72, or it's a mandated 45-day comment period, but during the comment period are not legally required to be responded to. Obviously, I anticipate the Commission and Council would be interested in hearing responses to all comments.
Thanks.
All right. Ms. Coberstein?
I have nothing else.
Mr. Ellsworth?
Yeah, I just want to mention a few things on the fires, particularly the campfire. I've got a list here. A lot of people have been asking how they can help and where they can donate. And I was going to see if the city, if we could get this list on the website or a link to it. The main places to go are the Salvation Army in Sacramento. You can contact the Salvation Army. There are lists of what they need in the different areas in Butte County, in Oroville, Yuba Sutter areas. So I'll ask the city if we can put a link on our website for more information about how you can donate, what they need, and that information will be available. I mean, there's been a lot of folks asking, so hopefully we can help.
Anything else?
That's it.
All right. Mr. Doyne?
Only briefly, just to say thank you to all the veterans out there for your service to our country.
Mr. White? As for myself, I'd like to congratulate the community for passing Measure E. The vote in favor of Measure E out of the city of St. Helena was the highest of any jurisdiction in Napa County. I think that says a lot about our community's thinking, at least, about housing that is affordable and the need for it. All right. That takes us to presentations and public recognitions, and we have one this evening, Arbor Day, and I think I saw Mr. Uribe here. So, our Arbor Day proclamation. Whereas in 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees, and whereas this holiday called Arbor Day was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska, and Arbor Day is now observed throughout the nation and the world, and whereas trees reduce the erosion of our precious topsoil by wind and water, cut heating and cooling costs, moderate the temperature, clean the air, produce oxygen, and provide habitat for wildlife, and whereas trees are a renewable resource giving us paper, wood for our homes, fuel for our fires, and countless other wood products, and whereas trees in our city increase property values, enhance the economic vitality of business areas, and beautify our community, and whereas trees, wherever they are planted, are a source of joy and spiritual renewal, and whereas the city of St. Helena has been recognized as a Tree City USA by the National Arbor Day Foundation for 20 years and desires to continue its tree planting practices. Now, therefore, let it be known that the city of St. Helena has declared the 15th day of November 2018 as Arbor Day and will be holding tree plantings in recognition of Arbor Day, for the purpose of expressing our support for efforts to protect our trees and woodlands. Dated November 13, 2018, signed by me, Mayor of City of St. Helena. So, Carlos, would you like to say a few words?
Other than just to invite everyone to the Arbor Day planting, which will be held at the library at 12:30, and we'll have students from, I believe, the Montessori and FFA helping out. So if you guys want to come down, we'll gladly pick a tree and a shovel for you guys to give us a hand.
That's November 15th.
November 15th at 12:30. Okay.
Next item on our agenda is a presentation by our by Matthew Demchuk for the Parks and Recreation Commission. Mr. Demchuk.
Good evening, council members. This is my second presentation for the Parks and Rec Commission update. Since my last report to the City Council, a lot's happened in the Parks and Rec Department, as well as the Parks and Rec Commission. The following are some of the exciting changes that we've seen in the last year. The city hired Andre Pitchley to assume the position of Recreation Director in July of 2017. And since his hiring, the Parks and Rec Department has made some significant advancements. First, the Parks and Rec Department actually moved their physical location from the Carnegie Building over to the Teen Center on Railroad Avenue. This allowed the department to establish a more formal, fun work environment for the staff. They also converted an activity room at the Parks and Rec Department office into the Redwood Room, where they hold martial arts and other group fitness activities. The Parks and Rec Department has created a new logo, which you probably have all seen. They have also established a new motto, "Here to have fun," as it says on the back of my shirt.
Okay, good.
And a new vision, which is to harvest community experience that celebrates St. Helena. The Parks and Rec Department hired Stephanie Yakabacci in the fall of 2017 as a recreation supervisor, and she joins Amalia Kolzicki in that position. Some of the exciting events that we've had over the last year, of course, you all probably participated or at least saw the fireworks in the sky on the 4th of July. But we did add several additions this year. We had a bike parade that was led by some officers from St. Helena PD. We had a community band concert at Lyman Park, and the Dixieland Band played on the youth baseball field before the fireworks. We also had some food vendors over at Crane Park. Since the last time I've reported, we've actually held 2 harvest festivals. Last year, in 2017, unfortunately, due to the wildfires, we had to reschedule from October into the first weekend in November. However, despite postponing the festival for a couple of weeks, attendance was still good, although a little bit below normal, but it was a very good turnout, and we all had a great time that year. This year, the weather was perfect. Attendance was back to normal, in fact, probably above normal. And we actually started the event on Thursday with a thanks and gratitude potluck. Then on Saturday, October 20th, the Hometown Harvest Festival got underway with a great fun run, which was hosted by the St. Helena Montessori, followed by a well-attended pet parade, and our first ever pancake breakfast hosted by the Boy Scout Troop 1, and food supplied by Sunshine Foods. With the community band kicking off the music, the festival had tons of artisans peddling their wares and local nonprofits selling food, beer, and wine. There was a great kids zone with lots of activities, including a bike rodeo conducted by the St. Helena PD and sponsored by St. Helena Cyclery. This festival could not have been done without numerous volunteers and staff that volunteered their time as well. So I want to thank everybody for that. The following are some activities and leagues that the Parks and Rec Department has provided over the past year, and I'm going to give you some participation numbers so you just kind of know how many people are served by this department. Bocce with over 1,500 participants. We had an adult softball league with over 75 participants. Youth soccer with over 300 participants. And in fact, for the first time, we have 14 young women that are actually playing at the club level. Youth basketball had over 100 participants. Summer day camp, 118. Performing arts, STEM, and sports summer camps with over 350 participants. We had a T-ball this last year with 49 kids. Martial arts classes with almost 200 participants. And a volleyball program with over 30 participants. Other activities that have been started this year, we have an adult boxing program, so if anybody wants to go out and get their frustrations out, that's a good place to do it. We also started an adult aqua aerobics. We also provide court time for tennis leagues and lessons out at Crane Park. Also, there's yoga in the park. It's a bilingual free community yoga in the park at Lyman Park on Mondays that ran from June to early September. And lastly, we added cheer camp. Another accomplishment this past year, with the assistance of the Napa County Department of Health, the Parks and Rec Department has spearheaded a county-wide Parks prescription program. Parks prescription programs focus on connecting healthcare providers and Parks and Rec providers to deliver outdoor community health programs. The Park and Rec's Napa County Pilot Project is a Green Friday event on Friday, November 23rd, the day after Thanksgiving. As for the Parks and Rec Commission, we have been working with the staff to finally start utilizing some of the funds available from the park impact fees. You will soon be receiving a staff report regarding renovations at Crane Park that include resurfacing of the tennis courts, improved lighting of the tennis and bocce courts, and other renovations. We hope to have several other projects presented in the coming year. I would like to thank my fellow commissioners, Donna Hines, Noel Strauss, and Autumn Tello, for their service this past year, and look forward to working with the new commissioner that will be appointed this evening, hopefully. I would also like to further thank Andre Pitchley, Amalia Kozicki, and Stephanie Yakabachi for their energy and enthusiasm this past year and really revitalizing the Parks and Rec Department. And I have to say this department has the hardest names that I can ever try to pronounce.
Only matched by our city clerk.
And I would lastly like to thank the numerous volunteers, which number probably almost 100, coaches, instructors that participate with the Recreation Department to provide various fun and enjoyable activities for our entire community. And lastly, I know it's on your consent item, so just in case we don't discuss it, Home for the Holidays, November 30th, at the Carnegie Building and Oak Street, and I hope that you approve the request tonight. And just remember, parks make it better. Parks make life better. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Next on our agenda is an informational item on St. Helena Ordinance 9.12, Curfew and Police Department enforcement. And our police chief...
is 6.3?
But 6.3 was on the agenda but should not have been on the agenda. Misplaced. So, 7.1. Yeah. All right. Chief Foley.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council, City Manager. Per your request, I looked into the ordinance involving curfew in our city, and it's found under Section 9.12 of the Municipal Code, and it covers young people under the age of 18 who are out during certain hours. In our code, it's from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. There are certain times when there's exceptions, and those are listed in the staff report. They are when accompanied by a parent or guardian, running an errand for a parent or guardian, working or going to or from a place of employment, responding to some type of emergency, or returning home from school, a cultural or recreational event. The curfew laws vary by jurisdictions. Ours are pretty consistent across the county as far as what they exclude and how they're applied, with one very notable exception is that ours is deemed an infraction, not a misdemeanor, which means that there's very minimal consequences for it if it's even enforced. The St. Helena Police Department over the last 3 years has had 41 contacts with young people as a result of the time being in the curfew range. 31 of those encounters were, there was some kind of suspected activity, criminal in nature, usually a vehicle code violation, some kind of noise complaint, or a shoplifting violation. 10 of those contacts were for curfew only. And of those, there were no citations issued. And as a matter of fact, our research for the last 10 years, St. Helena Police Department has not issued any citations for curfew violation. We use that as a tool to get in touch with parents, to bring them in and have them held accountable and be responsible for their young person being out late at night. So that's pretty much it, and open it up for any questions you might have. Not yet?
Not yet, okay. We may have you back.
All right, I'll be back.
Is there any public comment? I thought there might be.
Okay. So again, my name's Larkin Dwyer. I'm a junior at St. Helena High, and I'm representing the student body. So simply put, St. Helena High School, or the St. Helena Municipal Code 9.1201 through 4 needs to be stricken from our law or rewritten. In this code, police officers are empowered to stop anyone who, in the officer's judgment, looks to be under 18. But if someone simply looks under 18, there is not a just cause in stopping them, essentially guilty until proven innocent. It criminalizes looking young or being young. As this law is written, our youth and even adults aged 18, 19, and 20 years old can legally be stopped by the police. In St. Helena, looking young is probable cause. In our view, being young should not be a crime. We believe it is only reasonable for police to stop people who are committing actual crimes, such as being under the influence, vehicle code violations, noise complaints, etc. But simply looking young is not a crime. Not only that, but according to a study published in the Oxford Journal, curfew violates our First, Fourth, and 14th Amendment rights. Our code states, quote, or when the person is exercising rights protected by the federal or state constitution, end quote. The First Amendment states, quote, Congress shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the right of the people peacefully to assemble. Peacefully to assemble, unquote. The act of stopping a person without just cause is a direct violation of our constitutional right. There is no constitutional bias for such distinction, and the law is essentially, our law written is essentially telling us that we can follow or that we can have our constitutional rights. A distinction such as this would fail if applied to adults, so the same should be true when applied to minors. There is no distinction in the constitutional rights of adults and minors, as they have the same fundamental rights. The Fourth Amendment is protection against unreasonable search and seizure, and being stopped for being young is a direct violation of this. Furthermore, the Fifth Amendment states, no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment of a grand jury, unquote. So if a police officer were to pull you over, could you plead the Fifth? And if you did, would you be let go, no questions asked? This portion of the code is very unclear. All of the cities in Napa County have curfews except for American Canyon. But American Canyon has lower juvenile arrest rates. In 2015, there were 6 juvenile arrests in American Canyon, but in the city of Napa, there were 60. These rates are disproportionate to the population as well. If the goal of curfew is to reduce crime rates, is it successful? Not only is curfew pointless, it also damages the already strained relations between police and youth, and it is also a waste of police resource. There's an argument that the law is scarcely used, so why change it? But why is it in place if it's never used? It's a waste of time and, frankly, a waste of resource. In conclusion, we believe that the curfew is unconstitutional, a waste of police resource, criminalizes youth, damages relations between youth and police, and something that simply doesn't deter crime. I believe that it's the parent's responsibility, and teens shouldn't be punished for being out late or looking young. If something were to be done, the law needs to be rewritten or gotten rid of completely.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there other public comment?
That's a hard act to follow. Wow, thank you so much. That was really impressive. I was just wondering if there's any difference between how the police should respond to an under 18-year-old person if they're under the age of 12. If there are state laws about that, or it says just 18 or under. So I don't know if there are other threshold, 16, 14, any other threshold ages that might precipitate a different kind of response.
Okay. Any other public comment? All right, let me close public comment. Is there any further questions of the chief at this point by council members? All right, let me close the public hearing, invite council discussion. Who would like to start off? Well, I might make one quick comment. Just looking at the chart, it is interesting that St. Helena treats this not as a misdemeanor, but as an infraction. An infraction, at least in my judgment of it, would not be a criminal offense at all. The other thing that interests me is the fact that our curfew begins at 10 p.m., whereas Calistoga is 11 p.m., City of Napa, City of Napa is 10 p.m., but the Napa County is 11 p.m. It strikes me as perhaps worthy of discussion if we continue the ordinance as to whether we should consider moving the time back to 11 p.m. to bring us into the same situation as Calistoga and Napa County. That's just initial thoughts. Mr. Ellsworth, do you have some thoughts?
Are there any precedents from other counties that can show us how other counties manage this? Do we have any information from other counties?
We only looked at jurisdictions within Napa County.
Okay. Well, this came up at the high school at a debate about two or 3 weeks ago. So the first thing I'll say is that I hope that the young folks who came tonight can see that when they speak, things can start to happen. We're having a discussion tonight because you spoke up. And so that to me is the most important lesson of this, is that we're now discussing this. And hopefully we find a way through deliberation with the council, the community, and you, who this directly affects, to find a solution that works for everybody. When I first heard about it at the high school, I grew up in this town and I understand some of the issues, but there was something that I had not considered, and it was brought up to me a few days later by a parent, and they said that they worry too that their kid is going to get an infraction that might show up later in a job interview or at a college interview, that a bad mark from a curfew violation can follow somebody. So that to me made this a more urgent discussion, accelerated the idea that we need to talk about this. So I'm not really prepared to get too deep into where we go with it, other than we need to have this conversation. I mean, we need to have it. This is the beginning, and we need to come to a resolution fairly soon that satisfies everybody. So that's where I'll leave it right now.
Any further comment at this point? Does anybody else have a sense that we might at least think about moving the time back from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock?
I would be fine with that. I was totally unaware that we even had a curfew growing up in this city also.
Well, I'm quite sensitive to this because when I grew up, curfews that I think I recall hearing about were really temporary curfews that sought to get you by some incident that was affecting the community, and once the time of passion had passed, the curfew went away. That's what I always thought a curfew was. So I was a little surprised to see that in Napa County itself, generally speaking, there was a permanent curfew with exceptions on the books. And as I look at it and think about it too, even if you were a young person after hours and you could persuade the officer that you were exercising your First Amendment rights, I think that would likely be the end of it in any case. But it does have exceptions. It does provide the officers in that rare case with an opportunity to get a younger person home, and obviously this is show that it's used rarely, and mostly when it's used in connection with some other possible violation of law. So to me it might provide the officers with a useful tool, rarely used, but I would like to see it move back to 11 o'clock.
I have a question for the chief. So 25% of the time, kids are stopped basically for a pure curfew violation. The other 75%, there's some other infraction going on, noise or something. Correct. If we eliminated this ordinance, would you have a tool to issue some kind of citation for some of these 31 other things that are occurring?
Absolutely. I mean, they're criminal in nature to begin with. Mostly would be misdemeanors. You know, the vehicle code violations, it would be mostly infractions, but anything else would be a misdemeanor. So the person would be subject to a citation at that point. Curfew aside, that would be what the officers would be entrusted to do. Always we act with what we consider the best interest of the young person, and many times it is calling the parents. Depending on what the violation is, we'd call the parents and have the parents respond to take charge, and maybe nothing would occur at all. So, the curfew violation, the way it's written, does put some teeth into it for parental responsibility. And there was a UC Berkeley study that came out in 2011 that indicated that was that having curfew on the books was something that parents could resource as a reason to have their own curfew enacted. So, it kind of gives them a little bit more teeth, but that was in the UC Berkeley study. But, going back, the young lady made a lot of valid points, and there's been studies all over the board as far as the value of having a curfew, its impact on crime. Some say it does impact crime, some say it doesn't. It actually increases crime. So I think, looking at the studies, it's kind of ambiguous, and I think that's what comes out of most of the studies.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question, and that is, with the curfew on the books and with the officer in a position where, given a choice, he can write up an infraction with the ordinance on the books, does this give the officer more of an opportunity to write up an infraction as opposed to a misdemeanor?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Okay.
Well, but it has been used in that practice. I think the point that the mayor is making is there may be a separate crime going on, but there's also a curfew, and it seems like the practice would be to emphasize the curfew violation as opposed to maybe some very minor, like a noise violation or something like that, that you make a discretionary call, or do you enforce the criminal aspect also?
Well, if it was something as simple as a noise complaint, then curfew would be a tool to get in touch with the parents and put some teeth into parent responsibility, because it's an infraction for the parent not to respond to. So,
and I recognize that question was probably unfair to you without doing a lot of background research given your newness to our community. I assume that you vetted this with Officer Peterson and others. And what's the feeling in the police department whether this is a useful tool or not?
I think they find it of use at times, and in other times it's just a part and parcel to something else where officers come in contact with young people who are creating a disturbance, violating the law in one manner or another, and it's just a useful tool for the officers.
I might be the outlier here, but I would be in favor of suspending it for a while, with the understanding that you still have these other tools to deal with these other infractions, and see how it works out. I'm somewhat like you, Alan. I didn't grow up with a curfew in the town. I mean, if there was a riot in the city or something, there was a curfew. But I am somewhat sympathetic to the view that just because you look young, you can get pulled over and questioned. And there's only been, like 3 real curfew incidences a year based on this data. And can we live with that? Why not? But I might be the only one who feels this way. I realize that.
Certainly the idea of moving it to 11 while we look at this, I'm also not opposed to suspending it. If the police feel they have enough tools to deal with the other issues, to me, I think the point that being young should not be the trigger for getting looked at. I do, however, think there's probably some concern with folks under 18 out at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. If there's there is a difference between adults and minors in terms of who's responsible. And as you say, maybe this gives parents a tool as well. I'm always concerned with ripple effects, one way or the other. And so, to me, the idea of looking at another community that doesn't have a curfew, what's their data, or somebody who's removed a curfew. But I also think we're a small town. We're a small town where if we see a problem, we can start managing it fairly quickly. So the idea of suspending something that hasn't really been enforced, I also don't see too much of a problem with that. So I could kind of go either way.
Any further questions for the officer? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the suspension idea is a good one, and I would not be opposed to suspending it for a period of time, say 6 months, and then revisiting it and asking the police department to come back and tell us whether there's any differential experience between when it was on the books and when it was suspended for 6 months. And then if we were to go back, I would argue for 11 o'clock. Is that?
It's fine with me, sure. A test.
You're not an outlier. I'm in favor of suspension also, and I think 6 months. And frankly, I would actually raise it to 12 o'clock. But that's me. We can argue about that. But the initial, let's give it a 6 months. The arguments made by is it Larkin? Very persuasive arguments in my view, and considering the data that we have, I think when on balance, it favors a suspension to see what happens over the next 6 months.
What legally do we have to do to suspend it? We have to provide direction to staff, and do we come back with an ordinance that requires a first reading and a second reading?
That's exactly right.
Oh.
So the Brown Act, you haven't agendized it for that kind of an action, but we would understand that as being direction to staff to prepare an ordinance, because an ordinance can only be suspended by another ordinance.
Right.
So that would take 2 readings unless you made urgency findings, which I'm not hearing. So the normal ordinance adoption process would be applicable here.
All right. So that's the direction to staff. Thank you very much. And don't fear you need to stay further if you don't wish to.
Don't stay too late.
Thank you for coming and speaking up.
Ordinance hasn't been suspended yet.
All right.
they're all running errands for their parents right now.
It's only 7 o'clock.
All right, the next is an information briefing from the county, Mr. Lederer, relating to the slide repair on the Silverado Trail at the Pratt Avenue Bridge.
Want me to just jump in?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, Steve Lederer, Napa County Public Works, thanks for inviting me up here. Talk a little bit about the slide at Silverado Trail in Pratt, which occurred, one of actually 40 major slides the county had during the storms of January and February in 2017. When I came here actually about a year ago to talk about the schedule for all those various repairs, at that point I think I mentioned that this particular one was scheduled for 2021, if I'm not mistaken, based on priorities and funding. Subsequent to that, we were fortunate that we were able to get Federal Highway Administration, FHWA funds through Caltrans to help fund this project, and our Board of Supervisors also cooperated by moving some general fund money forward. The good news, on top of that, good news, bad news, is that FHWA, along with those fundings, provided a deadline, so the project moved up in the priority. So good for those who were interested in this particular project. So we're required to be done by the end of 2019. So the schedule right now, we are working on plans and specifications, the engineering solution for it, for the project, as well as obtaining an easement right-of-way from the uphill property owner that we need, because the slide continued out of our right-of-way and onto private property. The goal is to have our plans and specs done by the end of December. Because there is FHWA funding involved, there's a review period at Caltrans, which takes us to the middle of February, at which point we should be able to start the bid process, roughly 2 months to go out to bid, allow contractors time to put in bids, and then for us to review and go to our board to award, which has us starting construction in middle of spring, and right now our target completion date is July 28th of the summer of 2019. So that's our plan. Like I said, it's better than it was the last time I was here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
What was the completion date projected again?
End of July, 2019.
2019, great.
Yeah, and that I'll mention that also. That will include reopening Pratt, of course. We needed to close Pratt because the temporary solution, we put up the temporary wall, narrowed the trail so badly at that spot. But with the final completion, that temporary wall, of course, will go away. We will have a retaining wall, but it'll be back where the base of the hill was. Silverado Trail will widen back out, the bike lanes will be restored, and Pratt will be reopened.
I'm curious whether there are any provisions for a temporary opening of Pratt in the case of an emergency like a flood or a fire when people needed to escape. That's really the impetus for me asking you to come. Your other point is well taken. I mean, the deadline is great, but do you understand that there's, in my view, a public safety issue too with respect to accessing Silverado, and it's difficult to get out of here, as you know. Even on a Friday, coming into town, it's difficult to get in or out. I'm wondering if the county, or frankly the city, has thought about that, moving that barrier out of the way, or is that something that maybe create more problems than solve?
Before doing the closure, we actually consulted with CHP and CAL FIRE and St. Helena Fire, for that matter, in terms of letting everybody know of the closure. And obviously, it's on everybody's maps. I think it would depend on the type of event we're talking about. But the reason that we closed it was because of traffic, particularly coming, I guess it would be southbound on Silverado Trail. You've got such a conflict point there. So depending on what sort of event we were talking about and where people were trying to exit from, reopening that, even if it was practical, might actually cause more problems than it's worth. That being said, physically moving the barrier is not difficult. It would just take a forklift truck, and if CHP or fire decided that's what they desired, we could make it happen.
Thank you.
There have also been some concerns brought up about left-hand turns onto Pratt from the trail and then left-hand turns off of Pratt onto the trail. Has the county looked at any sort of way of eliminating left-hand turns for safety reasons? Has that ever been brought up to the county?
It has not. The original configuration, was there for many years. There was I'll say no particular, there was actually no accident history there in the recent CHP records, so that I'm aware of. So no, we really hadn't thought about changing what was there.
Okay, and if somebody did have a concern, could they get it to you directly to consider?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Letter.
Thank you all.
Thank you for being here.
You bet. And I very much appreciated the high school students here. That's wonderful. Hopefully they're all registered and will vote next time around as well. So.
All right. That takes us to our consent calendar. And as always, any member of the public or any council member may remove a consent item. The items are 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, 8.4, 8.5, 8.6, 8.7. That's it. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Mr. Mayor, if I
Yes.
might, item 8.1 is not going to be considered tonight.
Oh, all right.
I'd like to pull 8.5.
8.5, okay. Any others? Then at this time, the chair would entertain a motion to approve 8.2, 8.3, 8.4, 8.6, 8.7.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Councilmember Coberstein?
Yes.
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Councilmember Doring?
Yes.
Ellsworth?
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes. So that takes us back to 8.5. And let me. Is that you, Ms. Smithies?
Yes, this is the Lyman Park restrooms. We brought where we had it within the threshold of $45,000 for city manager to sign off on the contract. We brought this to September 25th meeting to discuss that we might have some change orders that exceeded that amount, but we didn't want to delay projects, so we moved forward and immediately we started encountering, and not the first week in October 22nd, the first week they started, we found a lot of dry rot at the base where irrigation sprinklers were hitting, and a lot of other dry rot within the walls from constant leakage and in the skylights. So we've had up to about probably $4,000 of change orders that will need to take place to get this project moving forward. We just wanted to be lean on the side of conservative here and go for an additional $10,000 in the budget because you approved $50,000 in the CIP fund for 18-19. But so we don't come back here again in another 2 weeks. We wanted to make sure we had enough to complete the project by the end of the month.
All right. Mr. Demchuk, do you wish to state your concern?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Matt Demchuk, 1000 Brown Street, also chairman of the Parks and Rec Commission, as you know. The reason that I kind of wanted to pull this and just bring this to the council's attention is because I've been on the Parks and Rec Commission since July of 2015. This is the second expenditure from the park impact fee that I have seen since I've been on the commission. When I joined the commission, there was $282,000 in that fund. As of June 30th, 2018, there's $745,000 in that fund. The commission has attempted over the last 3 years multiple times to use these funds to improve our parks. And yet, this is the second time. The first time was in May when the council approved $18,000 to be transferred for lighting at Carpy Field. This is the second time that you've used park impact fees without even any consultation with the Parks and Rec Commission. Now, I don't know what the guidelines are for using these fees, but it would make sense to me that we would be participants in this process. As I mentioned earlier, there is a project that we are going to propose regarding the tennis courts, but I just kind of want to get a sense from the council as far as where does the Parks and Rec Commission fit in on the park impact fees?
Okay, thank you. Any other public comment with respect to that? Let me close public comment. Anybody wish to address that? Does the city manager have any thoughts here?
I don't have any specific thoughts for you. I think initially in the budget last year we were anticipating working with a landscape architect, and some of the initial thoughts were associated with improvements to the park in general. And given the timing on discussions related to the City Hall project, the council provided direction to instead focus on upgrades to the bathroom because of its condition. It's the same bathroom I saw about 15 years ago as a visitor to town. Looks no different. And certainly there are always opportunities to check in with the commission, and this is just, that's the history on this specific item.
Okay.
Well, I think you make an excellent point about communication, and I think that we should be having a clearer dialogue, and the Parks and Recreation Commission, we should be more dialed in. It should be like a gear that's working with the council. And so I think that you're bringing this up now. If we can start to figure out how that dialogue happens so that the commission feels like you're aware of what's going on from the council level, and also the things that you're seeing that need to be done, because I recognize that too, that we have a clearer path for communication. So I'm all for whatever we need to do to step that up.
I have a question. Like in our traffic mitigation impact fee account, we have a specific list of projects. Do we have a similar list in the park impact fee?
The park impact fee works slightly different than the other impact fees because the city has met the requirements of how much parkland that we have, and so any impact fees that are put in the park impact fee fund can be used for any park improvements or maintenance. So we have a lot more leeway on the park impact fund, and as Matt had stated, we do have a sizable balance in it. We're expecting at the end of this fiscal year about $850,000 in the park impact fee that is at the council's discretion.
I think there's some merit to having some sort of process where we hear from the commission about, what their sort of goals are and objectives that they think we should be working on for the parks, and maybe build that into a prospective projects list. It makes sense to me. On the other hand, I would like to say that it's nice to see our staff looking to our impact fee accounts for things that we can legitimately pay for, like some of the SHAPE committee work I think came out of there. And instead of the money just sitting there and nothing happening, it is starting to be utilized more. But I'd be in favor of some sort of procedure where we maybe get a report or recommendations from that commission as we're getting ready to go to budget or another appropriate time.
Yeah, I would like to add in, I think with our new Parks and Rec director, there's a little bit more professionalism going towards working with the commission and actually coming up with projects that can, and staff reports that can come to City Council. The resurfacing of the tennis courts is going to be coming soon, I think, at our next meeting, and also the lighting at Crane Park. So I think the new regime at Parks and Rec works very well with the commission, and I think you'll see more projects coming in. But I do agree that maybe there should be a CIP list for Parks and Rec and to be able to utilize the funds that are available. So I see a salute. Yes.
And possibly towards ongoing maintenance, or, as you're saying, that list of projects so that the parks stay up up to date on what they're doing.
Yeah, and the parks, the commissioners have adopted different parks, and so they've put together lists of items that need repair in all of our parks. And I think bringing that to the council or putting together a CIP list and a maintenance list that can be added into the city's budget in the future would be good.
All right.
So
thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion with respect to 8.5?
Well, I had just a comment. I'd like to thank Mr. Demchuk for bringing this to our attention. I think when we looked at this initially, we saw an urgency because of the condition of the bathroom, and frankly, we lost sight of the overarching optics of how you may have been looking at other uses of money. And I don't think there's any slight intended at all. I think the communication does need to be improved, and so I thank you for bringing that to our attention, and we'll try to get better at it and working together on other bigger projects. So thank you.
Yeah.
So I would move to approve 8.5.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Councilmember Ellsworth?
Yes.
Coberstein?
Yes.
Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes. All right. Takes us to public hearings. And 9.1 relates to the temporary use permit. And that's you, Mr. Hausch.
Thank you, Mayor Galbraith, members of the council. Item 9.1 is an urgency ordinance to amend and restate St. Helena Municipal Code, Chapter 17.136050, temporary uses, and it would create a temporary use permit and an administrative review process for such permits citywide. To summarize the background on the report, the City Council prioritized this, among other efforts, to assist with improving resiliency and providing expanded retail options in the downtown. A draft ordinance was presented to the Planning Commission on October 2nd, and this ordinance was unanimously supported after making some recommended edits, which are included in the draft ordinance before the council this evening. This item was discussed by the City Council on October 23rd, and direction was provided to prepare an urgency ordinance with a limited time period, which is the action that's brought before the council this evening. Staff prepared this urgency ordinance to allow temporary uses to operate within the city, and it essentially creates a process that these uses may operate and propose to be approved, which sunsets on March 19th, 2019, so that's a 120-day process after adoption. However, the City Council would obviously direct staff, or could obviously direct staff, to make some of these provisions permanent should they so wish.
Any initial council discussion? Let me open up the public hearing. Does anybody wish at public hearing to speak to this?
Hi, I'm Bobby Monette. I'm speaking as a citizen. I was just a little, when I was reading the staff report, it seemed like a stretch that the reasons supporting the fast track, the urgency, what do you call it, the urgency move that was made, really didn't seem to match this particular situation. I'm not against it happening, and I realize that it needs to happen fast in order to get the Christmas shopping season in. But my suggestion would be that either we add language to this ordinance so that there are other reasons that would precipitate an urgency, so that we wouldn't have to twist our reality to fit the ordinance, because this is not an emergency for public safety. It's not, to my mind, it just seemed like the reasons for the urgency did not fit this situation. So my sense is, I think that's bad policy to twist an ordinance to fit the situation. I think we need a different ordinance or some extra language so that other reasons, like for instance the one that we're the real reason right now, which is economic and not a public safety emergency, could be used, and it would seem more genuine and less disingenuous. So I'm just suggesting that maybe you think about that.
Thank you. Any further public comment? let me open it up for council discussion. I must say, in response to Ms. Bonnet, when I look at the urgency findings, it says the City Council has received evidence from staff, the community, and the cosmic companies that the amended regulations proposed by this ordinance are immediately needed for the economic success, sustainability, and viability of the city's businesses and business districts, et cetera. So to me, the purpose for the urgency ordinance is well stated in Section 2A.
I think she's maybe more concerned about government code sections 36934, 36937. Says for the immediate preservation of the public peace, health, or safety, containing a declaration of the facts constituting the urgency and are passed by a 4/5 vote. So that's the legal question, whether preservation of the public peace, health, or safety includes sort of this economic need. That would be my question also. Makes sense. That's a good question.
Mr. Brown?
It is a good question, but having drafted these findings, it's my conclusion that they are legally valid if the council agrees with them. But you're not bound in any manner to adopt these as your own. If you were inclined to do so, these would support an urgency finding such that you could adopt this ordinance by the expedited process. I'm not sure what I can add to that, but legally I'd be very comfortable with you adopting this finding. But again, if you feel that either that an urgency approach to this is not appropriate, or that perhaps there's a different factual explanation you can provide, that would be appropriate as well. But legally, this would satisfies the provisions of state law that would allow you to act in an urgency fashion.
Okay. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. If I'm looking at this correctly, what we are adopting is this Exhibit A that's in, okay. I'm looking at Exhibit A, and I look at, on the second page, it discusses some of the things that we're going to allow, and number 2 is indoor pop-up uses, and then there's a question at the end. Includes or does not include non-restaurant formula businesses? Seems like that question should not be there, or we should have decided what the answer is.
So this is correct. This item was presented in the October 23rd council meeting, and that question was not answered. So it was posed at that time. There was no direction provided, and so staff wanted to ensure that should the council adopt this ordinance this evening, that they have an opportunity to answer that question if there is direction to preclude not formula businesses from being able to establish themselves temporarily.
And was it the Planning Commission view that we should only be considering non-restaurant formula businesses because restaurant formula businesses are generally prohibited, or what?
So when staff presented this to the Planning Commission, this question was asked to them. They were comfortable allowing formula retail businesses, non-restaurant. So there was no discussion of restaurant formula businesses coming into the community or being allowed to come into the community through this mechanism.
I would just say I don't know how I feel about the formula thing. Thankfully, we're past Halloween, because one of the things you often see are these pop-up Halloween shops, and is that going to be a great thing, stimulating economic activity in downtown St. Helena? I don't know. Since we are adopting this for a very short period, my preference would be to strike that, and that between now and when the sun sets, we look at some of this a little more carefully and fine-tune this ordinance so that we are ready to actually adopt something that has been vetted a little more thoroughly and that we're comfortable with. I'm still also uncomfortable with the fact that whoever does this is not required to comply with our sign ordinance, and that is in B, paragraph B, applicability. I would say, why not? I mean, you can put a temporary sign in the window or something that complies with our requirements. Why wouldn't we at least ask for that? I don't know.
I could live with that for 90 days. I'm concerned about what if things go off the rails with the use over even that 90-day period. I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but if somebody just is making a lot of noise or just violating all kinds of other things, even though they have this temporary permit, what are the enforcement mechanisms that are in place? Do we look to other code sections to address that issue?
So this ordinance does reference other code sections, and it would in no way allow an individual use to not comply with a separate established regulation, such as the noise ordinance.
And what about the sign ordinance?
So the sign provisions are referenced as something that staff needs to look at in considering what is being proposed. However, to Ms. Koberstein's point, meeting the strict regulations of all the zoning code is not required for the issuance of a temporary use. And the idea behind that is, say maybe a seasonal Christmas tree lot wanted to open up in town. They typically put fences along the property lines to secure the parcel, and they may wish to mount their temporary sign onto the fence. That may not be in a methodology that meets the strict requirements of the code, but there is intention. This code is intentionally written to provide some flexibility to address those types of circumstances.
I guess my concern would be if we have an established business that is, required to stick to the sign ordinance, and then a temporary business comes in, can it put our established business at a disadvantage if they're two separate?
Sure, that's a valid point.
I think another instance where it comes up is downtown. Generally, you can't be doing all your business on the sidewalk. And, are we going to... My idea of a pop-up was it was basically inside of a retail space.
Right.
And, do we want to suspend that and, just see what happens until the end of March? I mean, I think there are some things that we should still consider regulating, not just, even though this is temporary. I wouldn't want to be a merchant and have a temporary pop-up be doing something, as you said, that I myself can't even conceive of doing because the regulations don't allow it.
So this is written to provide flexibility to both new businesses that were temporary and existing businesses that want to modify their own operations through a temporary element. And staff did write this very broadly. Our current temporary allowances are limited to, I think, 4 lines of codes, and they're very narrow in their focus, where most cities who regulate temporary uses do so with a broad brush to understand that there's a variety of temporary things. These seasonal sales lots, these pop-up retail uses or museum uses, or those types of things that are temporary occupants of existing buildings. And then other things such as, car washes that are charity and garage sales. And so staff did attempt to draft broad regulations that would address all elements of temporary uses. If the direction is to pare that back, staff is happy to do so, and the ordinance can be modified as such.
Now let me go back to the formula business. My instinct is to allow formula businesses that are not restaurants. Let me see whether that is...
an example of formula businesses.
Well,
an example of?
So, in doing research for this, it's actually fairly common for shoe companies to want to have a pop-up retail space where, they usually sell their products through existing vendors. So a shoe company, Nike, may want to come to town and have a Nike-specific store with some additional branding and those types of things for a temporary time frame to allow direct marketing of their products to folks, and then that goes away. And there is provisions that any temporary use must take a break for 30 days before a new temporary use could occupy that site.
A couple months ago, we denied a formula business on Main Street, Green Bionics. Are they going to come back as a temporary use? I mean, I think we have to consider a little more carefully. I mean, I think we're talking about a very short period of time here, and maybe I'm overreacting, but...
And we do want to leave it, I think, broad, so we are getting many different ideas. I think that was the whole idea behind this, is to get
Right.
pretty creative. So, I mean, if you're going to start restricting, the Green Bionics isn't going to be here, or somebody else, or I think that kind of goes against what this whole pop-up idea is. So,
Do we want to hear from the public?
Sure.
Yeah, is there any further public comment? I thought I opened it for public comment. No, there's no further public comment. Well, let me go back and see whether we have agreement that we should not be allowing formula restaurants.
I'm agreeable with that.
Yes.
I'm agreeable to that, but I also, I'm taking Mrs. Koberstein's point, too, that to open it up to formula businesses opens it up pretty broadly. And if it's a 6-month ordinance, do we want to test it first without completely opening the door? Because the fabric of the town, what do the merchants want downtown as the businesses next door? Does that affect them in terms of what's there?
So maybe just to help the discussion, staff did, in the discussion with the Planning Commission, identify this as kind of a test drive, so to speak. So it gives both the potential future merchants an opportunity to try out opening a business in St. Helena, and maybe they would then file a formal use permit request to allow permanent operations. Similarly, it allows St. Helena to kind of test drive certain businesses. And so that may be an opportunity for the community and the adjacent merchants to see what it would be like to have a specific vendor operating next door. And if that wasn't something that was beneficial to the community, then I'm sure multiple opportunities would be made for folks to express those concerns. And it is worth noting that for the pop-up uses, they're limited to a maximum of 90 days. And that could be shortened by making a change to the ordinance.
And the ordinance itself is 4 months or 120 days.
That's correct.
Not 6 months. Yeah. Well,
Give it a whirl.
let me see whether there's support for adopting this ordinance with the proviso that we would not be allowing formula restaurants. Is there a motion to that?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Wait, are we adopting the whole ordinance, or is that a single amendment to it?
No, adopting the whole ordinance. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Doreen?
Yes.
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Councilmember Ellsworth?
Well, I want this to move forward, but I just have some concerns about the formula businesses. So,
We're voting, so if you could,
It's a test drive, Jeff. Come on.
all right. Well, I want to make sure that the merchants that we have in town are happy with what's next to them. So, I will support this and I'll vote yes. But I just, I do have a concern.
all right.
This also gives them an opportunity to try some new things without having to come in for a whole new use permit. So, I mean, they get to test drive just as equally.
Okay. And then the sign issue. Did we?
We're leaving that alone for the moment.
Okay, I'll go with the flow. We'll see what happens here.
All right.
And
And that
I
was
hope we focus on this again, like in January, and start looking at it, because there are some other things in here that I just don't think exactly fit. So, yes.
Yes.
And the motion was made to adopt by title only and waive further reading, correct?
That is correct.
Yes. I heard him say that.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, next item, we're new business. This relates to appointments to the Planning Commission and Parks and Recreation, and we had the interviews at a special session a week ago. So at this point, is there any initial council discussion?
maybe we should let our city clerk introduce it and talk about it.
All right, go ahead.
Briefly.
So before you, you have ballots for voting for a member to the Parks and Recreation Commission and a member to the Planning Commission. The applicants for the Planning Commission is Daniel Hale, Patrick Reggio, and for the Parks and Recreation Commission, you have applicants Robert Vasquera and Jeff Feeney. So it would be appropriate to take a 5-minute recess to place your ballots and send them off to the city clerk for tallying, and then we can reconvene and announce the choices.
All right. I got my staff report up here.
So are we calling for the 5-minute recess?
Sure, yes, we're at a 5-minute recess.
Wow.
Parks and Rec.
Which means a 15-minute recess? My back is
What do they use for SAG? What is it? That's not right, but there's something. Numbs it.
All right.
What? On this? Test drive. Test drive. Test drive.
That's fine. We'll see what happens on the
All hell could
sidewalks.
break loose in
That's-
the meantime,
yeah.
I know.
Okay.
Which it probably will. We have to encourage the businesses to do their own thing. It's like, hey, I
Yeah,
wanted to
I'm
do
more
this in conjunction
interested
with that.
in letting,
Which would be cool.
well, maybe all the
intriguing.
businesses will now have their sandwich board signs out on the sidewalks. And who knows what? Huh?
That's not legal. They can't violate the sign ordinance.
They're not subject to it. Your temporary permit is not subject to the sign ordinance.
No. Existing businesses. It's part of their existing business. Yeah, well, then we'll have to keep a running list of all the things that happen and go, we need to fix all these things. Which, until you do it, you can't.
Right. But, you
I mean, the
know,
3-month thing was the only thing that gave me, like, okay, this is not going to be forever.
yeah, I'm sensitive to the people standing out there hawking about the sidewalk. Merchants who are really concerned about it.
Okay, I'm supposed to sign this.
Oh, were we supposed to sign it?
Oh, is Matthew still
I didn't know. Yeah, I just don't
More professional.
That's right. When I was in high school, they rolled out of here. And so everybody to get to the judges made some stuff.
Or you better be home before I wake up in the morning.
Or you was worth the consequences. Yeah, exactly. A place I'd rather be. That's your kids. And that's your neighbor. Yeah, of course. So you can't get in a lot of trouble. Yeah, exactly. But see, that is not what I was doing. So that was like Ryan. Exactly. Well, like I mean, it's just so bad. That was all before. I was there for Halloween. The whole city. Oh, I left because I was wondering if I could.
Oh my God! How are you? Yeah, go over here, right? Okay. You live up here?
So, have you heard when it's
That was
actually
interesting.
gonna get certified?
Discussion about the park impact fees and just looking at those parks that haven't been taken care of. It's like, when is the city and
Because didn't the last time he didn't certify it until sometime in December?
Just that truck plow means that hey, after the presentation, the same feeling. Yeah, you could see it, you could feel it, absolutely. And then you try to map out who's on it. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's like it's fun watching Mary and Paul, because they whisper watching to
Are we ready? Cindy? We ready to go? All right. We return to item 10.1, which is the appointment of a planning commissioner and appointment of a Parks and Recreation commissioner. Mr. Popoulos?
We have tallied the votes, and the apparent Parks and Recreation Commissioner will be Robert Fresquera, and for Planning Commissioner, Daniel Hill.
All right. That being the consensus, I will nominate the two that you just mentioned.
I'll second.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes.
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Councilmember Doring?
Yes, thank you for your applications, by the way.
Ellsworth?
Yes.
Coverstein?
Yes.
All right. That takes us to 10.2, dealing with human trafficking awareness. And Ms. Smithies?
Yes, earlier this year, April of 2018, a proclamation for human trafficking awareness was presented to the Seroptimus International Group. And a couple of months ago, Edie Couch reached out to the city of St. Helena about posting flyers, being more proactive stance on human trafficking. And we're bringing this item to council tonight to discuss the flyer that they've provided for posting in public restrooms, and actually all restrooms, if folks would. I'll let Edie Couch speak to it more than I am.
Thank you. So I would like to first thank Mayor Galbraith for attending our second trafficking forum at the Performing Arts Theater in St. Helena. Thank you so much for attending, representing the city. As a group, the committee, we're looking at posting possibly both the proclamation that you signed, and we translated it into Spanish, and then to add the Stop Human Trafficking in English and in Spanish next to it. So what do you think?
Do you have any further discussion before I...
Oh, I see what you're going to do. Okay.
Before I call on council members.
Are there any questions?
Right. Any questions of
to what I said or comments?
Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Any further public comment? Let me open it up to council discussion then. Is there I certainly favor posting these items.
Yes, I do too. I had the privilege of attending last year's workshop, and it was an eye opener. I'm sorry I didn't make it to this one, but I'm sure it was just as well done. So yeah, I'm in favor of posting these on our website and wherever else we can post them. And
I think the issue is posting them in the bathrooms, public bathrooms, for sure.
And I believe their goal is to broaden, encourage other, not public restrooms per se, but restaurants, other facilities in the city that have restrooms that would be willing to post them in their bathrooms just to spread their awareness, and the 1-800 number.
I also think, with one of the things that really surprised me last year was the human slavery in construction projects. And I think that could be something that we could ask our contractors to post these with, on the job sites or in their offices also.
Well, that's an interesting thought.
Is there a presentation online that people can access?
You mean in terms of the...
So could you, I'm not quite sure what you mean, a presentation.
Well, if Peter, you said you went to a presentation last year.
Yeah, it was the same presentation that they did this year. There is resources that I know the main speaker had some videos and things that you can access online.
Yes. That is something that we could talk about. We have access that we could post all of those further information on our websites, on our Seroptimus website. So there are two Seroptimus clubs, the St. Helena Seroptimus Club and the St. Helena Seroptimus Sunrise Club. And we could definitely post more information about human trafficking there. And there is a commission in Napa, and the commissioner spoke, the officer spoke from that commission. So there is a lot of information in Napa County about the trafficking problems that are occurring in the county, and that the district attorney is doing a great job in bringing justice to the trafficking situation. There are traffickers that have been brought to trial and are now in prison. And it's not so much that the sources begin in Napa County, but there are a lot of traffickers coming in, trafficking women from out of the county. And that is what the big problem is, and that is what Napa County is going after.
I was just thinking if there's some link, as opposed to just a phone number, some link that people can get more information to. Sometimes that's another access point.
I think that that the best information is on the phone numbers that they can use, because that actually gives them the help that they need.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And I think most of us, in talking about it, have felt that the public spaces, the restrooms especially, are probably places that people who are having trafficking problems, that's probably where they would go to first.
Okay.
In our community.
Okay. Any further council questions? Thanks again, Ms. Couch. I think the immediate issue for us is to authorize the city to make the postings in the bathrooms. Is there any objection to that?
Well, that's what we need clarification, because it says in all public restrooms and other facilities, public and private. I'm not sure how much jurisdiction we have about private facilities, and I don't want someone to leave, well, the council passed this, so therefore a private entity would be required. That's voluntary, correct? And then what other public facilities are we talking about other than restrooms? So those two questions I have.
We really posed the question for the public restrooms. So the fact that it has additional other locations, there's no resolution of this. It's more of a direction to should we be hanging these flyers in our public restrooms and encouraging others to do the same.
Right.
Okay. I'm supportive.
I think you have direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edie.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. That takes us to 10.3, which is the introduction and first reading of an ordinance relating to mobile home rent park stabilization. Mr. Prestwich.
Thank you, Mayor. This evening, this item relates to an introduction and first reading of an ordinance adding to St. Helena Municipal Code Title 9, Section 9.24 to adopt mobile home park rent stabilization. This follows meetings held in July related to conceptual rent stabilization ordinance elements, an informational workshop and special council meeting on August 30th, and at your meeting of October 9th, when you discussed various policy elements within these types of ordinance, including maximum allowable annual rent adjustments, fees, vacancy control provisions, and regulatory and dispute processes. The direction was to staff to prepare a first reading of the ordinance. So tonight I want to briefly review some of those elements and the direction provided. So to begin with, in terms of maximum allowable annual rent adjustments, the permissible annual increase shall be the lesser of 75% of the percent change in the Consumer Price Index, CPI, or 3% of the base rent. In terms of vacancy control, the council expressed an interest in a modified approach, which would allow the park owners to raise rents above the standard annual amount, but would place a limit on that increase. The rents would be stabilized from that new amount, and as written, this permits the park owner to increase the space rent up to 3 times the maximum allowable annual rent adjustment whenever a lawful vacancy occurs. There's also an alternate modified approach that consists of that's included as attachment to the report. In terms of fees, the cost of administration, including the cost of mediation and arbitration, shall be borne by the city until at least 50% of the leases within the city choose to be regulated by the ordinance, at which point the city may impose a rent stabilization fee. And then finally, with respect to regulatory and dispute processes for rent increases, the staff report describes 2 different scenarios. The first is situations where the rent increase desired is greater than 300% of the percent change in the CPI. In this case, this is a process that results in mediation and automatically moves to arbitration. In situations where the rent increase is less than 300% of the change in the CPI, but greater than the maximum allowable rent increase, this results in a meeting and then essentially an informational meeting followed by a mediation meeting within a certain number of days. So that's the summary of the policy direction that was provided at the meeting of October 9th. We've incorporated that direction into the draft ordinance today. I also want to invite the city attorney to address the council related to some of the legal issues that you've been receiving correspondence on.
Thank you. With me this evening is my colleague, Deepa Sharma, who has been taking the lead on advising on this ordinance, is very experienced with them. I will say, in kind of briefly summarizing, the chief legal arguments against the ordinance that we've received were contained in a letter that we received from Mr. Rodriguez, counsel for the Vineyard Valley Park owner. We've reviewed those arguments in some detail, and I can summarize by saying there were chiefly three arguments there, and we're well satisfied that those arguments, each of those arguments, has been rejected by the courts. We feel confident that the ordinance before the City Council this evening is constitutional and fully legal, so that those arguments should not be deemed to be an impediment to you exercising your discretion as a policy body. If you have specific questions, perhaps Ms. Sharma can elaborate a little bit more on the three arguments that were presented in that letter. But again, to summarize, we feel confident that the ordinance before you is fully legal and constitutional.
Thank you. So the letter outlines a few legal arguments in addition to some policy arguments, and I will address the legal ones. So first, the letter contends that the ordinance standard annual adjustment, which as drafted would be the lesser of 75% of the consumer price index or 3% of the rent, would deny the park owner a fair return because their profit would approach zero. From a legal standpoint, courts have considered Mr. Rodriguez's argument and have rejected them. In the event that the park owner is of the belief that they are not receiving a fair return, their recourse is to seek an individualized adjustment, which the ordinance provides for. And so the park owner's council's statement that their profits would approach zero actually does not have any basis in the law. Second, the letter contends that they must be guaranteed capital improvement pass-throughs, and that because the ordinance doesn't guarantee that it is legally defective. But again, courts have resoundingly rejected that argument. The ordinance must consider capital improvement pass-throughs and the effect that they have in the owner receiving a fair rate of return, but it need not require that those expenditures be passed through automatically. And again, we have very strong case law that so states. So again, Mr. Rodriguez's legal arguments have no bases, and we are confident that in the event that a facial challenge is brought to this ordinance, that they would be rejected by the courts here.
All right. Any further initial discussion by the council? Is there any public comment with respect to the ordinance? Yep.
Good evening. My name's Nora Laird. I'm a resident of Vineyard Valley. Appreciate all of you being willing to spend so much time and effort on this issue. One of the reasons that I'm up here is because it's heartbreaking how contentious and divisive this has become. In a small community of elderly people, it's mind-boggling to me, and I don't want to throw any more fuel on fire in the things that I want to say, and I'm sorry to even use that metaphor tonight, given what's happening around here. One thing that I want to just remind everybody of is that the rent stabilization is totally a choice. And somehow that's getting lost in the point of view of the people when people start really polarizing. The whole aspect of choice seems to be lost. And for me, given other issues that are at stake in our country around choice, it just feels like choice is really an important thing to uphold these days. A couple of the points that were raised in the letter that we received from Greg and his lawyer point out that one of the downsides of the ordinance is that that the conflict resolution issue would blow up into a really big issue and cost a lot of money. And some of my friends at the park have actually done research on this and called owners of a bunch of different parks in California and found out that there's been minimal actual cases of conflict resolution, and that this has actually barely dipped into the funds allocated for this. And I'm not one of the ones who did the research, and one of the people who did isn't here because her husband just had surgery. So, but anyway, I think that that's an important point to know. And another, another thing that a couple of people I know have done research on is that under rent stabilization, properties deteriorate because owners aren't making as much money, and so they don't maintain them as well. And I guess this is happening in big cities and apartment buildings. But again, in mobile home parks in California, it's not happening. It's just not happening. There isn't any deterioration of the maintenance. So that's just another specific point. I don't want to address all the ones that I learned about research because I don't want to take much time. Oh, there's a timer here. My God. Whew. I'm so nervous. So I just want to say that I really support the ordinance in principle, partly because like I said before, I think it's really important for people to have choice. And that by the time my lease is up, or my husband's and our lease is up, I really don't know what we're going to decide, whether we're going to choose it or not. So my support of it doesn't necessarily imply that we're absolutely going to go for it. I just want the option as rational people who are, considering our end-of-life issues. And then I also want to say that I'm really grateful to some of the points in the letter that we got from Greg and his lawyer specifically. I don't know if you all know about the letter, but he proposed a rent credit program for qualifying tenants. And I know this is already happening. I've heard it's happening at Vineyard Valley. So I feel like Greg's operating in good faith. Does that mean I have to stop?
Just please continue.
Sorry?
Yeah, your 4 minutes is up, but please finish your thoughts.
Okay, I just had one more point. It's about the people who are for the ordinance. Most of them are quite appreciative of Greg as an owner, and that includes me, and quite appreciative of the park and how it's been run. So this isn't a personal issue at all. And my biggest point is, I'm a mediator, my biggest point is I'm wondering if the ordinance, if need be, if it could be written in such a way that with Greg's input, so that Greg could feel he gets a fair rate of return, and we could still have the ordinance if it turns out that the rate of return is in fact not fair. So I just would like to think a little bit out of the box, expand the pie, as we say in the world of mediation, and just try to think creatively so that we can write the ordinance in such a way so that our owner can feel that his needs are taken into account. Thank you.
Further public comment?
Hello, I'm Suzanne James from Vineyard Valley. And Mr. Mayor, council members, staff, thank you very much for all the time and energy you're putting into this issue. We deeply appreciate it. And having public comment tonight after the first reading is very helpful. I have 3 comments I'd like to make and then a question. The first comment is about unintended consequences. Outcomes that are not the ones foreseen and intended by a purposeful action. For example, there can be beneficial unintended consequences of an action. There can also be perverse outcomes. And a perverse effect is contrary to what was originally intended when an intended solution makes a problem worse. This is sometimes referred to as backfiring. And I think that's what we're beginning to see now, that there are unintended consequences, and how ironic that the very reason for bringing this forward to protect seniors in case the owner sells, to which he has given no evidence in the 43 years that family has owned the property. And now that's on the table. How ironic. Unintended consequences. The second point I wanted to make that Nora touched on was the owner's offer of a tax credit. That would mollify some of the intention of this, that it would be a private solution to seniors who are paying more than 30% of their income on rent, that a rent credit would be offered indefinitely while they're there. And then I really believe, say that person stays for 10 years. Their rent will go up 30% in that 10 years. I believe the owner, if the homeowner sells, should have the ability to raise that base rent by that 30% that he has willingly foregone for the previous owner. I think that also shows his good faith. I think it would take care of a lot of problems without a big program to do that. Then a third point I want to make is that Prop 10, as you know, was defeated in the last election. And that Prop 10, to my understanding, would have allowed cities to come up with their own solutions for rent control. And that was turned down. The majority of Californians, I'm sorry, I almost said Minnesotans, the majority of Californians are saying no to that. And you're finding that in our community. The majority do not want this rent stabilization. Okay, we submitted many signatures. There were many that are opposed to it, but were not willing to sign because they did not want to add to the divisiveness in the park. So do we really want to do this? Do we want to proceed on this path that may lead into lengthy, complicated, expensive litigation? Do we really want to do that? My recommendation would be that we start over. The process getting us here was flawed, in my opinion, and it's gotten us off track. I think what would help bring us back is our community needs to have much more talking together. And this will be my last comment. We need more of a chance to talk with one another. It's sorely divided. There's so much anger. There's so much fear, frustration, and we need to heal that. These are our neighbors and our friends, and I think we have a good chance to do that if we're given the opportunity to meet together, not indefinitely. But if you could just put this on hold so we would have time to start over in our community, that would be deeply appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. James.
Thank you.
Wow, that is one smart lady right there. I almost want to tear up my remarks, but I'll go ahead with them. Mr. Mayor, council members, good evening. My name is Doug Johnson. I'm with WMA, the Park Owners Association. 7 days ago, the complex, controversial issue of rent control was on the ballot for millions of Californians to ponder, both statewide and locally. Proposition 10 would have repealed the Costa-Hawkins Act and allowed local governments to place their entire rental housing markets under rent control. The measure resoundingly failed 61% to 39%. Napa County voters rejected Prop 10 by an even wider margin of 64% to 36%. In San Diego County's smallest municipality, National City, a rent control initiative was also on the ballot last Tuesday. How did it fare? National City voters rejected Measure W 54% to 46%. And surely the biggest rent control upset and surprise of election night occurred in the progressive city of Santa Cruz. Voters there crushed a rent control ordinance, Measure M, by a whopping 67 to 33% margin. All three of the rent control measures presented to voters in 2018 were defeated decisively. And that doesn't include the handful of circulated rent control petitions that didn't secure enough signatures to make it onto the November ballot. Voters are smart. They know rent control doesn't work when the government price fixes rent and not the resale price of the home. They know rent control isn't fair because it's not means tested. Wealthy residents should not be entitled to below market rents, and taxpayers should not have to foot the bill for that entitlement. The rent control debate here in St. Helena has torn Vineyard Valley apart. It is beginning to cause real angst, financial harm, and instability. Listen to the overwhelming majority of VV residents who do not want this ordinance. Please vote no on rent control, like so many Californians did last week. Form a task force instead to develop a viable, effective, permanent rental assistance program. Working together, we can identify those folks truly in need and give them the help and peace of mind they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Further public comment? Mr. Reynolds.
Good evening. I'm Greg Reynolds. Thank you for the continuing saga and listening. I wanted to say before I started that we have 900 trees in the park, okay, since you were celebrating Arbor Day, and over 90 of them are redwoods, okay? And the other thing is I've never been pulled over for looking too young. Those are the two things. Thought that was awesome. We forwarded a letter to all of you recently, and I wanted to participate tonight to summarize the logic in our letter a little bit. It appears that some of the logic has already been taken out of it. Like St. Helena, our research has showed us that a majority of folks that have moved to the park in recent years have the economic profile of those moving into the city. We really have proven out, I think, through our research, and we'll be glad to show that as appropriate. St. Helena and Vineyard Valley is a subset of St. Helena. And I'm referring to the St. Helena housing update that Erica had presented. That is, they have the means to buy a house in the park and qualify to afford for the rent. This fact diminishes the reality stated clearly in the bottom line. The council's support of RSO is a windfall for some. Not all, but for some. Like the results in Prop 10 vote, you have seen a petition circulated and signed by a majority in the park speaking out against the RSO. Those voices continue to express their perspective. Will the council, with economic data and citizen perspective, still ignore the obvious? We provided a suggestion that would keep those truly in need, either through the city subsidy or a park rent credit program. We would find a way to assist them, and that would be targeted. RSO will only assist those who take advantage of the RSO after their lease expires. In many cases, they will still be seeing increases, but not a credit on increases. And that's for many years. I mean, the leases don't expire tomorrow. We believe this is a far more targeted program that will assist those that are in the greatest need. We also believe the assistance can come much sooner than an RSO they must wait for. The suggested changes recently laid out in the current version don't support the property and business plan. We are under market in 113 homes in the park. The 75% CPI will do further damage. And factually, the vacancy control leaves us many dollars short if we are locked into the ordinance. Capital improvements create a whole other set of challenges in supporting this. The big picture, the letter speaks clearly. The petition spoke strongly from the citizens. We're hoping you don't pass this, as you might imagine. We have no plans at this time to sell or change the use of the park. If you do pass this, you will kill us over time. And although it may not be a legal argument, the mathematical approach of at 0.75 or up to 3% is a going out of business strategy is the way we see it. Bottom line, you should adopt the ordinance in spite of all the information provided. We would have no choice other than to begin exploring alternatives. Number two, the subsidy program, the rent credit program is way better. So say yes to a targeted program, but not yes to an RSO for folks who don't necessarily need it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further public comment? All right. Let me close public comment and invite council discussion. Mr. White?
Well, I have talked to a number of people in the park, and I am against the RSO. I believe in the program that we started for a strategy for affordable housing, and I think that incentives for developers to do affordable housing is a much more practical way to see that happen, and I don't see that that government intervention with more regulation. I'm against that. That I think that it's punishing somebody who has done an excellent job running a park for as many years as they have. I think this park is a shining example of a way a mobile home park should be run, and I think a lot of the people, or most of the people in the park, are happy with the way that it is. And as I think one of the tenants said, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So that's my position.
All right. Mr. Ellsworth?
I've got a question. If the park were to sell, would the rental assistance and subsidy program be required of a new owner if the park were to sell?
It could be part of the process if that's what we thought was the most appropriate way to approach it.
But wouldn't be a requirement.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Reynolds.
Yeah, we could make it a requirement. I'm still against selling, of course, but this whole process has opened that up. But to answer your question, it's something we could, if we were in a position that we had to move forward with this, I think we would try to approach it with the same sort of fairness and attitude that we've approached 45 years of managing.
Thank you. I want to hear a little bit more if anybody has any other comments.
Ms. Coverstein?
I first want to say that I don't question the sincerity of people who oppose this ordinance. I know many of them. I respect them. Consider some of them to be my friends. Unfortunately, this process never rolled out the way we hoped it would. And what happened was a lot of misinformation floating around and anxiety. And it's only kind of ramped up with some of the recent communication that's been put out. I recognize that we have a petition signed by residents. We've been told the overwhelming majority of people oppose this. In fact, the people who signed the petition represent less than half of the mobile home spaces in the park. I do recognize and I appreciate your comment that some people just may have not felt they could sign anything. But for me, there's more to this than that. This is not, in my view, an issue to be decided by one neighborhood in perpetuity for everyone else. It's true that what this does is it regulates a specific type of housing. And that is different from the Proposition 10 measure that was on the ballot. This is rent stabilization for mobile homes, which is widely recognized and accepted in California, and ordinances like this have been upheld up and down the state. To me, the reason to support this is because this is really a city issue. It's not just a Vineyard Valley issue. And in my view, if we fail to do something regarding rent stabilization in Vineyard Valley, we're merely paying lip service to our goal that we would stabilize, maintain, and improve access to housing in the whole city. Some people have talked about the white paper, and the purpose of that white paper was really to identify multiple strategies that we ought to be considering to address the housing situation in the community as a whole. This ordinance is one strategy specifically identified in the white paper that will help address documented increases in housing costs in St. Helena and maintain a diversity of housing types. I just want to briefly review a couple things that are in the white paper. The median sales price of a single-family home in St. Helena right now is over $1 million. It takes the income of over $200,000 for somebody to move in here. We have a big mismatch between what it costs to live in St. Helena and who can afford to pay it. And one of the unfortunate results is that we're losing our middle class. The character of the community is changing. One of the key regulatory measures that was identified in the white paper was to establish rent stabilization ordinance for senior housing. And it's more than just a bullet point. The white paper goes on to say that St. Helena has a high ratio of seniors to other groups. It's growing annually. Housing for fixed-income seniors is of critical importance to providing a diversity of housing and to accommodate all life stages in the community. For example, Vineyard Valley provides both affordable senior housing but also the opportunity for affordable home ownership and the stability that home ownership provides to a community. In order to ensure the preservation of this housing type, its preservation would need to be further incorporated into the city's housing goals and a rent stabilization ordinance considered. And that's what we're doing. We're considering a rent stabilization ordinance. And the white paper goes on to say that in addition to preserving senior housing, we should follow up with a policy that specifically calls out the preservation of a diversity of housing types and affordability that embraces all life stages and the entire range of needs. It also notes that home ownership for fixed-income seniors is in short supply and at risk. I realize there are some second homeowners moving into Vineyard Valley and some people of means. The question is that the way we want the entire park to go? I think we have to recognize that there's a life cycle of housing in the community, and Vineyard Valley is one part of it. There are many people who live in Vineyard Valley who lived elsewhere in St. Helena before they chose to live there. The fact is that single-family homes in Vineyard Valley cost about 1/4 to 1/3 of what a single-family home costs elsewhere in St. Helena. And to me, it's worth taking steps to ensure that that continues to be an option for people. It provides the stability of home ownership at a lower price, the privacy and the freedom that comes with owning your own home. A lot of people don't want to move to a condo we have other housing options for older persons in town, but a lot of people would still like a single-family home. And I can tell you what what's happened in my own neighborhood. A family, an older couple that lived on my street for years, sold their house, and they moved to Vineyard Valley. And I'm only surmising, but I'm guessing that that meant that they captured some of that equity that had built up in that single-family home over all those years, and they were able to have a more secure retirement at a lower cost. And the other thing that happened is that house did not get demolished. It did not get renovated at the tune of $2.5 or $3 million. A young family with children moved into it. And that is the life cycle of housing that we can promote by ensuring that Vineyard Valley is still a viable option for people. So that's why I'm committed myself to refining and adopting this ordinance. I have suggested changes. I've heard some of the comments of ownership. And I just want to clarify one issue. There's a lot of confusion about so-called vacancy control. And there's a lot of confusion about what happens when a lease expires and whether ownership has the option to raise rent to market. And I've looked at the ordinance carefully. I mean, true vacancy control relates to a lawful vacancy, which is when somebody is evicted or the house is actually moved off the site. That's lawful vacancy, and the owner has the ability to raise the rent in those cases. What's of concern is what happens when a lease expires or a home sells and then a new owner comes in. And as I read the ordinance, it's quite clear to me that one of two or three things can happen. If the home in question, if the lease is already stabilized, the new owner gets the benefit of that stabilized rent. If the lease in question is an exempt lease, if it's more than 12 months long, the space becomes subject to rent stabilization. However, what that means is that Greg has to offer the person a 1-year lease, and if he does that, he has to offer that lease at a rent that is equal to the highest rent of a comparable space. On the other hand, that person can choose to sign a longer lease, and then he's free to do what he has been doing, which is to set the rent wherever he wants to. So I really fail to see that this ordinance is a real destruction of the business model that he has operated under. I have other comments about small changes I would make, but that's all I have to say for now.
Mr. Doring, do you have anything at this time?
Well, I guess first I'm very sorry that there's so much consternation in the community and anxiety. And I agree that we can do a lot more talking, and I thought that we recovered pretty well after we had some missteps, and we've done a lot of talking over the last several months. We take this seriously. We're human beings here. We're not here to punish you or to jam something down your throat. In my heart of hearts, because I have so much experience in Calistoga and saw the benefits to people there, and I know folks don't want to compare the two. We're so tribal in some ways. That's them, this is us. I get that. But I've had personal stories with people who have benefited greatly in Calistoga, and I see that happening here. And so it's hard for me as a human being to walk away from that. Other people may have different experiences. But from my perspective, sitting here right now, we haven't even kicked the tires yet, much less test drive the ordinance. We have no idea where this is going to go. That is why I insisted that we have not a 5-year, but a 2-year look-see to see where it's going. And I made the commitment, I'll continue to make the commitment to the ownership that if this thing is going off the rails, and with the information that you provide for us, under the ordinance, we are committed to looking at it and making it right for you and the park so that the rents are stabilized and you enjoy a fair return. We are committed to that. I'm committed to that. I have no reason not to be. In my view, there's at least 6 provisions in this ordinance that allow a mechanism for a rent increase. It is not as daunting as some suggest. There's a lot of give and take. There's information meetings. There's mediation. It takes a long way to get to an arbitration. There are many steps along the way to get a fair return. For me, my perspective going into this was I want to try to maintain the status quo as best as possible. And I heard from the ownership saying, for 45 years we've been able to have these many leases and only charge a 3% return, and we've been doing fine. The place is beautiful, and we are making a profit. I've heard that from the ownership. So I try to be consistent with that and try to work on an ordinance that is consistent with your business model. Now, there may be a lot more details, of course, and there are, that I don't have. A lot of that information was not shared with us, and so we don't know the inner details of what's going on with your investors and with this mobile home park, and I look forward to looking at that information and working with you. There's nothing to stop us from talking just because we pass an ordinance. Look, these ordinances work. Now, from your perspective, and I represent business people all over the state of California and all over the country, yeah, I understand completely your perspective as a business person. Nobody, you don't want government involved in your operations. Things are just fine. You certainly don't want to be as transparent generally as I would want you to be, and I recommend that to my clients. We don't want to just give up information, but in this particular circumstance, it's so unique because of the possibility for exploitation, and I'm not saying that is happening at all. It's the unfair bargaining position that we need to protect as a government. We have to do that. So I'm for this ordinance, but I see many of the points made by your attorney. I can see there's room to work on this ordinance. I think the vacancy control aspect of the ordinance needs to be worked on a little bit. I would like to see a little bit more language, especially on the abandonment, which you raised a concern about, where you're having to go to court, after someone just leaves. I don't know how often that happens, but you're spending a lot of money, and you should be able to get that back. And I don't know if there's a potential, but one of the things that bothers me is when you have a sale to a second homeowner. And for me, that might be an area where that purchaser should pay a rent that is not artificially low, should go up, because there's a difference there. We want to, frankly, disincentivize second home ownership, and we've all talked about that. Maybe you don't, but as a community, I'm talking about. So there's something that I'm willing to explore there. The other thing is, with respect to the status quo and the 3%, I'm willing to go up to 100% CPI or 3%, whichever is lesser. Now, that's a little bit different. I mean, they're all over the map. I know about Concord. I know about Calistoga's. But there's an option in here for you to sit down with these neighbors and say, wow, even that's not working. And I can go up to 3 times the CPI if I can convince people that these are absolutely necessary expenses. A quick conversation, maybe a little mediation, and you can get that done. And here's the thing. You have so much support as you argue that it seems fundamentally realistic that you will continue to get that support if you ask for that increase up to 300% without the need for an arbitration. You basically stated the case that you have the support, and I see no reason why you cannot continue to have the support if you have a legitimate expense that is not met by this the annual adjustment. So that seems fair to me, and it should be fair to you. A couple little things, I think we've limited to AAA, and I'd like to see JAMS also as a potential arbitrator. There's little things in here that I know that Mary may have too, but there's a couple things that I have. But look, I'm willing to give it a try and willing to revisit it and willing to keep talking, even about this rent credit. I mean, I know it's that or this. Maybe creative minds can do something with both kind of working, or the ordinance going forward and still exploring that option. I don't know enough about it, frankly, but I'm willing to at least look at that. You know, so 50% of the people are not going to be happy with this, maybe more. I don't know. But I feel a strong conviction that this needs to be passed, and we need to at least give it a try. Like everything, it's not set in stone. It's something that we can work on. We have that model in our community with the short-term rental ordinance, for example. We spent a lot of time working through all those issues, and we made it better. We can make this better if there are issues that need to be adjusted. So that's my commitment. It's an option for people. I find that very persuasive. It's an option for people. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Do you have any further comments at this point in time, Mr.
Well, I think this is very difficult. I tend to think that Mr. Doring and Ms. Koberstein make very compelling arguments. I want to listen to Mr. Reynolds and his needs. I think the idea that there's some refining or some focus that can go as we go to making sure that this works out for him and his investors as well. I see that this works at other parks, that there's a model that works. The biggest fear I have is that we don't do something and a sale happens, something changes. It's happened in Napa County at 3 other parks that I know of where they no longer are places where people live, but they are hospitality entities. And I think we need something in place, and I think that moving forward is something we should do with the idea that we want to work with the ownership to make sure that this gives them the fair rate of return. I think it's a model that can do that, and as a community, the commitment to revisit it. I think as a council, I'd even be willing to revisit it in 1 year and look at where we are in 1 year and see how things are going and what needs to be done. If the subsidies and credits can be factored in a way, I think we should be discussing it as we go. But I think we need to move forward.
As for myself, I've previously expressed my opposition to the ordinance. My position has not changed. Basically, the Vice Mayor summarized very well my view of the issue here. But it does appear we have 3 council members that wish to move forward, so I would turn to them and ask, do you want to form a subcommittee of 2 to fine-tune the ordinance?
I'd prefer to just give some further direction to the staff tonight on some of the issues that I've come across, and further review of this, and have them bring this back for a second reading. But I think there are some things that need to be corrected or amplified. I've got about 8 or 9 of them.
All right.
Is that okay with okay.
Mr. Prestwich?
If we're able to incorporate the specific comments in the motion tonight, it can be considered for a second reading at the following meeting. But if we're not able to do that, it would need to come back for a first reading at the next meeting.
Well, you can let me know.
Okay.
I first want to address the vacancy control. I think the change that was made there, I think it should be put back the way it was, so that on actually a lawful vacancy, which is removal of the home or eviction or some other things that are allowed under the state statutes, the owner basically has the right to set the base rent. And I would add in there abandonment as it's defined in the California statutes, so that in a case of an abandoned mobile home, the same right rests with the park owner.
the owner has the right to set the base rent to a comparable? Is that what you're suggesting, or not just wide open discretion? I'm needing clarification for that, as I'm
Okay,
sure council is.
What it does say is, I need to look at the red line. I'm looking at the change.
The whole idea of vacancy control is to limit the ability to increase rent upon a sale, right, or other changes. So I just want to make...
Yeah, there's two aspects of vacancy control. There is a sale of a home to a new prospective homeowner, and what the ordinance provides there is that you have a stabilized lease that the rent inures to the benefit of the new homeowner. If you have a sale and you don't have a stabilized lease, what I understand would happen here is that because the rent stabilization program is in effect, that Greg is obligated to give a city information sheet to the prospective homeowner and explain that there is an option for a one-year option and then there is an exempt option. And it's really up to that homeowner, the same as everybody else here, to say, I want to opt in or I don't want to opt in. And if they decide to opt in, they opt in at a comparable rent. If they decide, I'm going to sign a long-term lease, he's in the same position he's in now. And so I don't think we need to change that aspect of vacancy control. The other part of vacancy control deals with this, what's called a lawful vacancy under the statutes, where he basically has the discretion, and that's probably something that is rarely going to happen at Vineyard Valley, the abandonment of a mobile home or taking it off the lot completely. But there he has more discretion, and I would just leave it as it was. What he's permitted to do is charge a new base rent whenever a lawful vacancy occurs. That was the original language. So it's up to him in that case to determine the base rent.
I think we need to have clarification on that issue to make sure that what you're saying is what the intent of the ordinance is, because I've understood vacancy control as a completely different concept than what you're talking about, and so why do we have the need for a vacancy control provision in our ordinance?
It's to govern what happens when there is a new tenant is coming into the space. That's what the provision is for. What can the park owner do? How much can the rent increase at that point? And so you've opted, last time you've given direction to have a modified approach, which means that there is a cap on how much the park owner would be able to raise rents upon a vacancy. My understanding from Councilmember Copperstein is that you would like to add abandonment as a ground that would allow the park owner to raise rents to market.
Yes,
in that event. Is that correct?
What's called a lawful vacancy under this ordinance would be abandonment, removal of the home, or eviction of the tenant for reasons that are specified. And then separately from that, I mean, for some strange reason, in the vacancy control section, it also talks about what happens when a home that has a stabilized lease is sold to a new owner. I mean, that's a completely different thing, but it just happens to be sitting here in the vacancy control section. And I mean, you can maybe look at this more before this comes back, but in my mind, reading through this again very carefully, it's quite clear what happens. And it all depends on whether there is a stabilized lease in effect or not. And if not, whether the new owner of the home chooses to go with a stabilized lease or not. But maybe you could look at that a little more.
Yes, we'll come back to
that. That's critically important for me to understand that. If we don't need vacancy control provision for what Councilmember Coberstein is talking about, then that would be interesting to know. Because I understood that, well, I don't, maybe I don't have an understanding, I'm confused, but I think we need to check that. What is the need under those circumstances where there is a stabilized lease and the property sells? Do we need vacancy control to address that? Or is the park owner automatically obligated to tender stabilization in some form or fashion to that new tenant? That's what we need to know there.
I think another way of thinking about this is, are there any circumstances under which a change in occupancy of the space, are there any circumstances under which you would want to limit the park owner's ability to bring the space rent to market?
And my understanding of what the ordinance provides now, and this is Section A under vacancy control, is that the park owner is prohibited from increasing rent for a mobile home space upon the sale, transfer, or other conveyance to a new owner. And you have to remember that this ordinance applies to stabilized leases. So what that's saying is not on every sale, but on when you have the sale and you have a stabilized lease in place, that's the provision that holds. If you have a sale and you don't have a stabilized lease in place, there are other directions that the ordinance goes. One of them is the current practice. And another one is that the new owner might say, I want the one-year lease. But you can look at this. I believe that what happens then is that the one-year lease is based on the highest rent for a comparable space in the park. Which leads me to my second comment. Some changes were made to the definition of comparable space. I would like to add the word location in there. Right now, it talks about the size of the space and it talks about the views. I think that the location, it's in the definitions section, I believe. Yeah, it's in the definition of comparable space. So it's a mobile home space that is suitable for comparison, taking into account such characteristics as the size of the space as well as available views. I think it certainly ought to also take into account location, because I do think that has an impact. And later on I'll talk about some more information we'd like from the owner. I think I would like to know what, if you had to create sets of comparable spaces in Vineyard Valley, what would they be? But for now, I would propose that we add location.
I would appreciate some direction on whether you'd like that definition to be all-encompassing, that those are the only three things that you would like to be taken into consideration, or would you like more characteristics to be taken into consideration, if it makes sense, even if it's not specifically enumerated?
You know, offhand, those are the three that come to mind. Maybe, as you get into this situation, we would discover others that are relevant that we don't know about. People who live in the park may know about them. So I'm not opposed to leaving the language of taking characteristics such as, so that at least those three are taken into account, and there might be something else that we're not aware of.
If there's a subsequent conversation about distinguishing between a primary homeowner and a second homeowner, a homeowner that has a second property here, I think we would need some distinction here. I assume that comparable would refer to someone that doesn't have a second home.
Well, a second home is exempt from rent stabilization. It cannot be subject to rent stabilization. And so I'm not sure how we could regulate it in this ordinance. I think it would fall under the basic rules that the person comes to Greg and wants to move into Vineyard Valley, and they strike a deal just like they had been striking a deal. And comparable space comes into play when you're selling your home it's not stabilized, but the new owner wants a stabilized lease, and then you have to find the comparable rent. I think that's the place it comes into play.
The definition says such as, so that leads me, such characteristics as, that leads me to conclude that there may be other things.
There might be.
And there should be other things. I think there's probably all kinds of different ways of evaluating that.
I agree, but I think location should definitely be
I agree with that.
enumerated. Following up on Paul's comment, I would change the formula from 75% of CPI to 100%. There's a provision in the administrative fee section, which a lot of people are going to think, well, this isn't even applicable because we don't have 50% of the leases stabilized yet. But there's an important provision in there about the owner reporting and providing information to the city about the rent roll. Not all the specifics of it, but that particular reporting requirement, I think it should be clear that that information comes in whether or not the fee provision has kicked in. And I would suggest that it come in within 60 days of the effective date of the ordinance. I think what your provision now says is it comes in on May 1st or 31st. And if we're really going to adopt something like this and try to work with it and develop it with the park owner, I think having more information sooner than later would make sense. I have a couple that are just smaller. There's first of all, I think it should be clear to everybody, and one of the things we should do if we take the step on second reading to adopt this ordinance is have the city information sheet prepared and out there. It's required to be given to people who are signing leases, and it should be kind of a plain English explanation of what this is and what the procedures are. And there's some confusion about capital improvements. I think the letter stated that it was going to prohibit rehabilitation. And I would just say if you look at the definition of capital improvements, it covers new things, but it also covers rehabilitation. So it's not going to prevent, the capital improvement provision is not going to prevent the construction of renovations or rehabs to capital items.
Does that include upgrades also?
Yeah.
Or I assume that falls within that. It's pretty broad.
Yeah. Capital improvements are new improvements or replacements which directly and primarily benefit and serve mobile home park homeowners by materially adding to the value of the property and appreciably prolonging its useful life or adapting it to new uses. And then it goes on from there. It's more than ordinary maintenance or repair.
I could see how that definition's a little restrictive. The word new improvements or replacements, as opposed to something that's remodeled. There's gradations of work.
I see what you're saying. I think new just relates to improvements, and then there's replacements, and you're talking about remodeling.
Yeah, other things that are less than brand new, totally taken out. Something that's up. That's why I use the word upgraded.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we have. Well, I'd like to broaden it a little bit more to include something that's just not new, something a little bit more than that. I don't know what that language would be.
So I can say new improvements, comma, replacements, comma, or upgrades.
That's fine with me.
There's a provision, yeah. Are we done with that one?
She suggested adding upgrades. I'm fine with that.
I'm a little concerned about the words adapt it to a new use in this definition, because in the context of mobile homes, new use has a specific meaning, like changing the use to something else. And so I'm not sure why that language is in there. Maybe you could elaborate.
Right. So I looked into this issue, and that phrase "new," adapting it to new uses, is specifically tracking language in the IRS in order to get tax credits, for instance. And so, if we struck that language, I'm concerned about a preemption issue. And so, to address the concern that you've raised, I added in that language the direct and primary benefit to mobile home park homeowners.
Okay.
Does that address your concern?
Yeah. I just have a couple more quick ones. In the definition of gross income, this is 9.24.130. This is where you're determining how much revenue the owner is receiving. I think the situation in Vineyard Valley is that water, sewer, and garbage collection are sort of passed on or passed through as add-ons to the rent. And so in the section C, it begins with revenue received by a mobile home park owner from the sale of gas and electricity to homeowners, where they're billed individually to the homeowner. This is considered revenue. I would just add water, sewer, and garbage collection, because I think it's the practice right now that those are billed to the homeowners and passed.
Water and sewer, yes. Gas and electric are separate today.
And garbage collection, I believe, is also an add-on, and that's just to tailor this more to the actual situation there. What it goes on to say is that revenue will equal the total cost of the utilities, I guess I might say, or services. I think of garbage collection as a service to the homeowners. And that's just a small change. I have a concern about the financing section of this. Generally, in operating expenses, what an owner is allowed to consider as an operating expense is interest, to the extent that the owner is required, pays more interest because they're required to refinance under the terms of their existing loan, and the costs might go up. Say they have a balloon payment or something. Or they might be subject to a variable rate loan where the cost is going up and down. Those increases in costs are considered part of normal operating expense. It sometimes is the case where a park owner owns more than one park. Maybe this is never going to happen here, but they can be financed as a package. You might go to a bank and get a loan to finance all of them. In which case, I think there should be some clarifying language here. This is in 9.24140, Section 11, which talks about increases in interest payments. I would like to add something to that effect, that if the park is financed as part of a multi-asset portfolio, the allowable increase in interest costs will be limited to the amount reasonably attributable to the mobile home park.
This mobile home park.
This mobile home park, yes. And the last
Sorry,
one
can
is,
you repeat that?
Okay. In the event the mobile home park is financed as part of a multi-asset portfolio, the allowable increase in interest costs shall be limited to the amount reasonably attributable to the mobile home park based on the percentage of total asset value or such other allocation established in the loan documents. Lastly, I think there's just a couple words missing. This is in section 9.24.150A, special base year adjustments. This begins by saying that mobile home park owners may obtain a one-time special adjustment to the base year NOI or base dates if the rebuts. I think there's some words
Park
missing
owners.
there. If the mobile home park owner rebuts. That's all I have.
Did you get that?
Now, are those changes captured to the point where we can have a first reading?
Okay, got it.
A little bit of housekeeping in addition to that. The sections currently in your draft of 9.24.260 environmental determination and 9.24.270 partial invalidity, those are boilerplate provisions that are unnecessarily repeated here. They're in the what I call the carrying ordinance, the enabling ordinance. So those should be deleted because they're as I said, they simply repeat provisions that are already contained in the ordinance that adopts this exhibit. We can ask, I mean, they're going to have to vote those changes. So. The question, one question also was whether Councilmember Doring's suggestion that we broaden the arbitration to allow for jams in addition to AAA, whether that is agreed to, and we will assume for purposes of our drafting that it is, and the vote will of the full council will determine whether that's appropriate, or the maker of the motion, once that motion is made, can adopt that along with the other clarifying amendments. Not sure whether other council members want to offer any clarifying amendments.
I think we're
The suggestion for regarding the second home provision that Councilmember Doring suggested, at this moment, that does require some additional research. And so in order to adopt this as a first reading, we would need to later on offer that as an amendment.
I guess, let me just clarify. Our suggestion with respect to that particular amendment is that we don't have a lot of confidence or comfort around that until we take a look into that. If the council wants to adopt a first reading tonight, our suggestion would be that we don't include that in tonight's, but we include in the motion direction to staff to research that and propose an amendment if that's appropriate.
That's fine.
All right, so with that, is there a motion by one of the proponents?
I'll move adoption of the ordinance with those changes and request that it be brought back for a second reading.
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Just to clarify, that motion was also to adopt by title or introduce this by title only and waive further reading.
Yes, thank you for that.
Councilmember Coberstein.
Yes.
Ellsworth.
Yes.
Doring.
Yes.
Vice Mayor White.
No.
Mayor Galbraith.
No. Okay.
Could we take another break for a few minutes? 5 minutes?
Sure.
Okay.
Let's see, how much more do we got to go? About another hour's worth? Oh, God, I've gotten...
55 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
That's a way.
Can I get your signature?
Oh, sure. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay.
Instead of $30,000, you just put a coin operated for every quarter
Yeah.
you get 100 gallons.
10.4. I forgot this one. We ready to go? Cindy? Cindy? We ready to go? Are we ready to go? All right, let me reconvene our meeting. And we are on item 10.4. Mr. Prestwich.
Thank you, Mayor. The item before you arrived on our city staff desk on November 2nd. We were notified by the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC, that it had opened a proceeding, that's a technical term, to guide and review investor-owned electric utilities wildfire mitigation plans. And we and others, whether you're a public agency or an individual, have been invited to be considered a interested party and provide stakeholder input to help the CPUC determine the scope of the proceeding and eventually to provide guidance to the electric utilities on what the plans should contain. And what they're really referring to when they speak of plans is reference to Senate Bill 901 requires electric utilities, this includes PG&E, to prepare and submit wildfire mitigation plans that describe the utilities' plans to prevent, combat, and respond to wildfires affecting their service territories. So, as you probably know, we've been provided notice twice by PG&E over the last month related to potential public safety power shutdowns. This is PSPS as an acronym. And in October, Calistoga experienced a shutdown. I've included in the staff report some of their initial concerns, and as we know, this is going to be a difficult and challenging policy issue over the coming months, if not well beyond. And related to this is once the deadline passes, which by the way is tomorrow, to join in in the proceeding in terms of helping to shape the scope of the proceeding, the schedule, the process. There will be an opportunity for public comment in December and potentially beyond. And so whether you're an individual or the city as a whole, people and agencies will have, again, an opportunity to comment in December. And in fact, we were provided by the CPUC a flyer, which I've included on the table in the back, and we'll provide some information on our website about this as well. But on Friday, December 14th, the CPUC is having a public safety power shutoffs workshop and this will be from 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. in Santa Rosa at the Santa Rosa Veterans Building. But this information, this workshop is a bit related to the work that's being discussed here tonight. And the question for the council tonight is really, do you want to join as a party? And I will tell you, in speaking with the city managers of Yountville and Calistoga, both agencies, I believe, are planning to join in as a party to help shape the conversation. If we're interested in participating, we would communicate that tomorrow to the PUC. If you have any feedback that you'd like to add tonight, I would be happy to communicate that if you direct me to have the city serve as a party to the proceeding. And there's information attached to the report related to the rulemaking that will follow, as well as how to opt in as a party. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, my reaction is that we should participate, intervene in the proceeding. It may well be that our fire department, which has significant experience with these wildfires, will have productive comments, and if we're a party, then they can be seen as coming from the city of St. Helena. So I would urge that we intervene formally as a party.
I agree, and I think since our neighboring communities are participating, I mean, we're all in this together when it happens. We should join them.
Yeah, and it may be possible for us to submit a joint submission coming from the three cities up Valley.
And considering our collective water sources, come from those areas too that are affected by wildfires, that gives us an extra reason to discuss this because of however the practices are arranged should take that into consideration too.
You're attempting to elicit from us at this point whether we have comments about the scope of the proceedings, correct? And you kind of outlined some of the things. CPUC has jurisdiction over certain things and does not have jurisdiction over others. Under the discussion, you have wildfire prevention strategies for electric utilities, protocols for mitigating impacts of public safety power shutoffs, utility procedures for maintenance and inspections of lines, outreach to first responders and customers, including low-income, elderly, disabled, and those with limited English, restoration of service after a wildfire. I think that's a great scope, and I just want to say that to kind of get the discussion going. I'm frankly, the thing that I hear the most is the lack of targeting when you do a shutoff. When you have downtown businesses that are so reliant and need to stay open and feel like, why are they shutting ours down? And I know there's all kinds of technical reasons. I guess that's included in the scope. I think they probably have heard from jurisdictions, but do we want to emphasize that again and again?
I think there are a lot of nuances within these 5 bullet points, and just in speaking with the staff in Calistoga, the experience they went through revealed a number of other considerations. And just imagine a mobile home park that has a single utility connection, right? So the power, the account is coming through one account, and that account is receiving notices of a potential planned shutdown, but it's not necessarily reaching all of the customers. There were considerations related to how small you can configure the shutdown. So is it possible today to limit the shutdown just to the hills around Calistoga, for example, and not the entire town, and particularly the main street and the businesses? And today the grid does not appear to be configured in a way where you can individually shut off micro elements of the grid. And over time, that infrastructure could be built out potentially down the road in a way where you can shut down smaller pieces to it. But I think there were a number of nuances with these planned shutdowns that just the experience they went through over 72 hours revealed these nuances that probably need discussion and consideration, well beyond just the conditions and circumstances under which they might occur.
Has PG&E have they given a draft mitigation plan or a mitigation plan to the Public Utilities Commission? I mean, if they were supposed to have, let's see, if Senate Bill 901 had them starting this in 2017, is there something to actually start from if they already have a mitigation plan?
I don't know the answer to that at this point in time, and I'm anticipating that these will evolve over time, and I believe they call for an annual review, so the expectation is that they evolve from year to year, and I think we're at the infancy of what these plans will look like, and this will be an emerging area of public policy that will take a long time to work itself out.
Okay.
So they're having difficulty targeting the shutdowns to specific discrete areas. Is it? I mean, one of the things I think about is that, even if they shut everything down, could they then take the next step and have a temporary generator that sort of bypasses the shutdown to serve certain critically important areas like the downtown, that kind of thing? I think that, I mean, of course, that's infrastructure, but on a temporary basis, I'm not sure what the extent of that is. That would be one way around. Okay, you can't avoid shutting down the whole city, but then next step is turning on parts of the city with temporary facilities. Be something to
right. And I think that in Calistoga, whether they're private businesses that have considered those options,
well, of course,
or the agency themselves considered that option, there's interest in identifying solutions like that, as well as perhaps modifying the grid in a way where it can be shut down in a smaller configuration. This experience in Calistoga also raised some issues about the hospital, St. Helena Hospital, which has redundant power, but if the primary source of power goes out and they don't have another source of redundant power beyond that the second redundant, the first redundant power, they are unable to perform surgeries. And so communication has become an issue, whether there was a presence in the town during the shutdown or not. The communication, the redundancy, the public safety, the communication with residents that happen to be on a single part of a single account when there are 100 or more different individual customers. I think the lessons learned out of Calistoga present a number of challenges from a policy perspective for these plans moving forward. And of course, there'll be an incredible number of lessons learned from the fire last year and the fires this year.
Well, I think you have direction to intervene the city as a party in the proceeding.
Thank you. And I have had some conceptual conversations with the two adjacent city managers about a shared comment down the road or shared communication, and we do think that there's going to be some value in having the valley speak as a whole on the subject matter, given the fact that we're in the center of a lot of these considerations, and will continue to be so.
So putting the placeholder in there tomorrow that we want to do this as a body, and then we have an opportunity to kind of refine our comments.
Right, and open a dialogue with our neighbors. Thank you.
Okay. 10.5, Elmhurst Raw Water Pump Station. Ms. Smithies?
Yes. Well, as many of you are aware, the Lower Reservoir has three primary users. Two of them are under contract agreement, RLS Middle School and the Spring Mountain Vineyard, which we approved earlier this year. The third is the individual permits. Most of them are contractors, but we do have a few landscape irrigation users that get billed a quarterly permit charge when they draw water at the Elmhurst Pump Station at RLS. We were asked, due to concerns from council and residents, that how we charge permits on a quarterly basis. Those who might use it for landscape don't necessarily follow the standard quarterly year system. Like contractors normally follow April through October, which kind of follows the quarterly system, whereas landscape users use the water when there's been no rain. So they don't normally follow that regimen. So we also had the potential loss of revenue because we had some witnesses see folks not even actually entering their data in the honor system book, which is a logbook at the pump station. So we did some research, and the raw water permits are set by county resolution along with the rates. There is a public process involved, so we discussed with team with Finance, Public Works did to collaborate on coming to a solution of billing. We think it'd be on a monthly basis, similar to what we do now for a base rate with our standard water. But since we're already in the user fees, we're reviewing the user fees, that we should probably go through that method with Wildan and just wait till all the user fees are up, because there's a whole public hearing process, and why do one fee when we're going to do it all at once very soon. And the next step would be the honor station. We do have it in our CIP 10-year rate study. We included a $100,000 project in year 2025. We did some research to see what other municipalities do as a pay-as-you-go system, similar as a fuel pump. And City of Napa is happening to installing this keypad system where you can pay as you go. So it can eliminate the manual service that is there now, and city staff time going out to the field, checking on things. We still have to go out there and check for clogs. We've had some clogs in the system, but it's approximately $35,000, $30,000 for the equipment, internal install by operations staff, and then probably $5,000 for the Wi-Fi capability and connection to City Hall. So we could either move that up or wait a little bit and see how City of Napa goes, and then we could maybe eliminate that user fee altogether down the line. But it would ensure our water supply and protect it, even though the losses are the million gallons over a 6-year period and the $2,500 loss in revenue is not a whole lot. The gallons of water seem like a lot, and it was just one more security measure in place for our water supply.
What's the acre footage of the lower reservoir?
I don't have that at the top of my head.
Okay. That came up the other day, and I meant to ask.
And with the restrictions in place, it might be reduced. We're still waiting on determination from DSOD. They've been a little bit busy trying to handle a lot of things to do with the Oroville disaster last year. So we're hoping to get that information pretty soon on further restrictions on the lower reservoir. So we're asking that direction from council.
Just a quick question with respect to the cost of the new equipment. Would that then be built into the charges that we recover?
The $100,000 was built into the current rate structure, but that was that was deliverable in 2025. If we want to try to move it up in the capital improvement program, we could.
Well, when you say current rate structure, what I'm asking is whether the costs that would be incurred with the keypad and so on would figure in the way we set the charges for those that specifically use water from the pump station.
That I would have to look into and get back to you on.
I mean, shouldn't that be part of the study that suggests what these charges should be?
As far as the current study underway,
Yes.
or the next, we could ask them to look into that.
I mean, it seems to me that we should be recovering 100% of our costs from the users of this pump station, one way or the other.
Agreed.
Is there any further direction?
Is there any thought of, at some point, looking at tying this in to our treated water? Is there, I mean, it's just a capacity issue. Has that ever been discussed, whether it's a...
It was certainly discussed back in 2010, and the cost of a treatment plant there was pretty high in relationship to the benefit you would get out of it. Again, I'm just trying to remember what the acre-foot capacity of that reservoir is. It's very small. I want to say it's around 600 acre-feet.
I don't think it's that.
Not even that.
No. Tom knows.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's 100. Yeah, you're right. It's very small.
I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, I think Spring Mountain Vineyards is able to take, 40 acre-feet per 25, and then RLS takes 10. Yeah, so but it's not that much.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah, about 140, I believe.
Yeah, and again with the restrictions, that could impact it as well. So it's just too small. All right, have you got the direction you need?
Just to hold off and
hold off. Look at how the city of Napa is faring, and then do what you can to get the costs into the study that fixes the costs with the idea of full recovery.
I recall that it was supposed to have taken that into consideration, but we can double check.
Okay, good.
Can I just ask one final question? And maybe April knows this. Hello. How much revenue do we get from the sale of raw water? If people, if people are actually paying based on how much is being used, is it a significant revenue source?
I'd have to do the quick math on it. So there's a chart inside the report where in 2018, 40% that was lost was $378. So if you double it and add some change, probably about $750, $800 per fiscal year. It's pretty minimal.
Just seems a little odd to me to pay $35,000 for a meter when the cost of the water, the revenue, is like negligible.
We can recover it over 50 years.
The one benefit would be, the offsetting benefit would be the savings in staff time, because currently Public Works staff will go out there, they'll actually get the log, bring it to the finance department. And so sometimes it's hard to read. It's pretty minimal, but that would be one cost savings.
But there's also the contract users, so they're paying into the raw water fund as well.
Do we have a camera in the room where people are supposed to log in? Or let's
invest in a fake camera. Oh, sorry.
There may be a more cost-effective way to do it. I think monitoring is a great idea, particularly with water. It's an important commodity, but you have to balance what we make off of the raw water with what we would put into a system. So I think looking at the different...
Yeah.
Is there any public comment with respect to this? All right. Sure. It is, okay.
I'm probably one of the, Tom Belt here, I'm probably one of the people who've complained about the the users who are kind of taking the water. I can tell you that I signed out, I probably take water every 3 days, from there for my garden. And there's been several times when I'm the last person to sign out, and then 2 days later I'm the next person to sign out. But then there's water on the ground where someone has taken water before me, and so and then there's been a couple of occasions where the contractors weren't going to sign out, and I've been waiting in line, and I've kind of told them to sign out. So it is a little bit of a problem as far as the honor system is going. But I do hear what Council Member Koberstein is saying. It's not that much money in the first place, but I do appreciate Erica making a comment about, the few of us, the landscapers that use the water. I mean, I've been using it more since the rates went up in 2016, and it, I pay probably $50 every quarter for just the permit, and then, but the use of my water isn't $50 either. So it's a very valuable thing to have. I don't know if you know the history behind it, but I came to the city council back, I think 2014, when we were having these severe droughts, and I have some fairly expensive peonies on my property, and I didn't want to lose them because of 65 gallon per day per person we were looking at, and so I asked at that time if we could take some of that raw water and the city council was nice enough to make that happen. So I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate it very much. And I know there's not many people that use it like I do, but it's nice to have the insurance, knowing especially now, November, we've had zero rain in November. It's nice to know that if I needed a couple of thousand gallons to last me through a period, I could keep my plants alive. So anyway, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Belt.
Thank you.
Okay, do you have the direction you need?
Yes.
All right. That takes us to 10.6. Ms. Mitz?
Great, thank you. The information that's presented in the report and the City Council agenda packet, it reflects all transactions posted through September 30th, 2018, so it is for quarter one. Additional details for the General Fund, Water Fund, and Wastewater Fund are provided as attachment attachment 1. For the General Fund and the Water Enterprise Fund, both our revenues and expenditures are tracking. We're on target for both of those. There were some anomalies in the General Fund, but that primarily has to do with the attorney's fees. Even though we had the invoices after that date, we made sure that we included it in there so you can actually see what the actual amounts we spent for the first 3 months. Additionally, we had some strike teams in July and August for the fire department that increased our expenses, but it also increased our revenues. And then also the benefit payout to the police chief upon his resignation, but that will be offset by salary savings that we have with our interim police chief. For the wastewater enterprise funds, the revenue received is currently at 22%, so it is a little bit low. We're typically about 25%. How that equates in dollars, it's approximately $88,000. So staff is going to continue monitoring that to see if during the Q2 that actually increases. Our expenses, with the exception of our attorney budget, are on track for Q1. The attorney budget for the wastewater fund is allocated $30,000. However, we are going to need an increase in this budget due to the ongoing discussions for mediation regarding the revenue shortfalls for the term of the current rate structure. So that is a brief summary of the Q1 report. Staff is recommending to receive and file the report, as well as a budget adjustment of $30,000 for the attorney budget for the wastewater fund.
All right. Any initial council discussion? Any public comment? Closed public comment. Is there a motion to approve the staff recommendation?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call.
Vice Mayor White?
Yes.
Councilmember Koberstein?
Yes.
Ellsworth?
Yes.
Doring?
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith?
Yes. Final item is
We got two more.
two more. Where am I here?
10.7.
10.7. This deals with standards of conduct. And Mr. Prestwich?
So during the summer, the council updated their rules of procedure for the conduct of city meetings and standards of conduct. And at the meeting of October 23rd, direction was provided to staff to consider some additional language additions related to private conversations. The council designated two liaisons, Councilmember Doring, Mayor Galbraith, to serve as liaisons to work on some conceptual language. This language is included in the staff report for your consideration tonight.
Any discussion? Let me open it up, public comment. Any public comment? No public comment? Is there a motion to approve the recommendation?
Move to approve.
Wait.
Hang on a sec.
Oh,
Do you want to? You had something to say?
I just had a question. What does this result in? This is sort of like a warning. Be aware that things you're saying in private conversations or messages you're communicating in emails, refrain from doing this, that, and the other thing. How does this fold into any kind of complaint structure or any kind of enforcement or anything? It's not clear to me.
Well, it's just one section of the many that is already listed as potential violations, and there is an enforcement procedure in the existing procedures and protocols.
Which would require somebody to bring it to the attention of the mayor or the vice mayor or some other council
Presumably,
member.
yeah. What would be an example of something that you would want to be addressed that's not addressed?
I just wanted to be sure that it led to something else besides just being a warning of you shouldn't do this.
Well, that's how you start, right? I mean, the whole system is a little bit of an honor system. You can't. There's only so much you can do, right? And then you have what is the ultimate sanction? Some kind of a don't do that anymore. I mean, it's
I think it's more
of an educational process.
It's more of a deterrent, actually. Than, just wasn't clear to me. I mean, we're talking about this in part because people have sent us communications lately, and under the current ordinance, there wasn't really anything that could be done with them.
So does this feel like this is starting to create a roadmap that something can be done if somebody feels there was an inappropriate email or an inappropriate communication? Does this give us a mechanism to address that with some solid steps?
I guess we have to look at the complaint section, wherever that is. Okay, so I think I'm on page 26 is the beginning of complaint.
3.4, enforcement and sanctions.
right. You see number 4, enforcement?
Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at page 26 where it talks about a complaint. So now a complaint could be lodged with respect to these private communications. Am I reading that correctly?
Substantial evidence means evidence that reasonably supports a conclusion. This not means hearing officer.
Right, so that gives a...
Yeah. Ooh, the city clerk gets to be the arbitrator.
We okay with this at this point?
Yeah, I think it's something we need to address. It's another one of those things that we're trying out tonight, like temporary uses and other things, and see how it goes.
So
I made a motion.
is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor White,
Yes.
Councilmember Ellsworth,
Yes.
Coverstein,
Yes.
Doring,
Yes.
Mayor Galbraith.
Yes.
Finally.
All right. 10.8. This deals with parking spots in front of City Hall. Smithies?
Yes, this item was brought up to my attention, I think, about 2 weeks ago. The fire chief, during an exec staff meeting, said, what can we do about that line stop?
I almost got hit there today.
And when you find the statistics of it, you realize why it's always there. It's the busiest bus stop in the city for the Vine Transit, and when you do the math of a 35-foot or 40-foot bus, and actually it's a 39-foot, if you want to be very specific, of the loading zone. I don't know about how your parallel parking skills are, but that's very short distance for a bus. And if you drive up there in the morning and there's no one parked in front of City Hall, they take up that whole run. And in the afternoon, I should have got the picture last week at Honda House, the cars, they cheat over that line. In the temporary parking spots. So we're here tonight to request the removal of those two temporary 20-minute parking stalls to allow a safer access for that bus to pull in during the days and weekends, and not encroach into the actual crosswalk and the red zone, because their loading stop also happens to coincide with the post office box, so they have to scoot even forward to open up the door. So allowing this increased line of sight at the crosswalk will, and also importantly, is our public safety officers leaving Britton Way, and they're having to inch out, losing critical response time entering the main street. So we're requesting support of this item and moving forward with the red zone. We reached out to MVTA, and they said, you're reading our minds. We were just about to ask you the same question. And so that's what we're here tonight. This won't be the end of the red zones. I have another item next meeting for Pine Street for Honda House. But first things first, this is the item in front of you.
Okay.
Spring Mountain Road and Madrona.
Wait a minute. Don't you have to recuse yourself on that one?
I just named the intersection.
Any further?
Can I make a motion?
Well, let me see. Any public comment? Ms. Chateau?
Jesse?
Close public comment. Yes, you may make a motion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor White,
Yes.
Councilmember Ellsworth,
Yes.
Coverstein, Doring.
Yes, and
Mayor
thank you
Galbraith.
for bringing this forward.
Thank you.
Good. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.